Welcome to my channel. My name's Bissy and my goodness, we're here. Episode 1 of the Vampire Lestat breakdown. If you enjoy this video, please do like and subscribe, as that will let me know that I'm doing a good job. Okay, so with that said, let's get into the video. Okay, so the episode starts with what seems to be the end, an auction of Lestat's belongings pertaining to his time as a rock star in 2025. Now, we don't know the date exactly that this is taking place, but we have a lot of our major players here at this auction, starting with Armand. Now, Armand is wearing an eye patch. He looks incredibly somber, and it does look like his eye is missing. There's scarring around it as well. Next, we see Louis approaching his seat using a cane to walk. We then see that Louis is missing at least part of his leg, and he has a prosthetic. Now, I got this comment about Louis' leg on my reaction video, and I do have a theory on how to answer it. I will leave it for the spoiler section, and that's just because we haven't heard about it in the show yet. But I do think we have an answer from the book, The Vampire Lestat. Now, as the auctioneer sets item 1 on fire, after he's just presented it, mind you, we see this framing between Louis and Raglan James. Now, I find this super interesting, and bear this in mind for point 2 in my spoiler section. And speaking of point 2, I want you to take very close notice of Raglan and the way that he's holding himself, the way that he's walking, the way that he's looking in this section. Okay, and next we learn that the failures refer to the body of work that Lestat has titled The Failures. Now, that is all of the albums that chronicle his time as a rock star. Now, Lestat has undoubtedly failed many people, many important people to him, but he's also been failed by people too. Now, I wonder if that forms part of the failures too, how he's been failed. Now, Louis and Armand's chemistry stands out here to me. If what I think is going on is actually going on, then they just cannot help themselves. And speaking of looks, we see the looks between Louis, Raglan, and Armand. Now, they seem like knowing looks, and again, I'm going to point you to section 2 of my spoiler section. Lestat's narration leads us into day 1 in Detroit. We meet Lestat's band, and he explains that they're performing in smaller venues to induce FOMO. He later goes on to explain that he's actually being shallow and really fears empty seats, so that's why they're staying in smaller venues. We get our first glimpse of a couple of members of the Fang Gang, and they seem to be trying to lure Lestat unsuccessfully into a trap. We learn that even after 30-odd gigs, Lestat and the band are still trying to iron out some kinks. It also seems that Lestat may be resurging the theatrical feeding that was established in the Theatre de Vampire. But this time, it seems that he has a system in place to help revive his victims. We meet Christine Claire, Lestat's lawyer, as she has him sign some documents that will help tie up some loose ends from a really crazy night in Corvallis. I think that's in Oregon. He's buying the wife, I don't know who of, an early retirement, and the lawyer a new boat. Now, after that night in Corvallis, it seemed that Lestat needed a body double. His name is Jada, and Christine's connections found him in the Czech Republic. Now, what I will say is pay particular attention to this fact. Don't forget it in times to come, I think. It's something to look out for. We also get a reference to morgue report. Now, I think that might be a nod to the morgue report that we see in the titles. Now, it could be nothing or it could be significant. I'm not sure yet. We then see Daniel for the first time, and Daniel has conveniently skipped the show. Daniel is on the tour bus with Dr. Farid, who is not here. Lestat begins messaging with someone who he simply titles Toi. Now, of course, that's French for you, and he's named himself Moi. Lestat messages Toi that he is right off Rome, Wisconsin. Now, I think this is a nod right back to episode 2 of season 1, where Lestat and Louis discuss a Roman holiday. As Lestat refutes Louis' accusations to Daniel, no to threatening Claudia on the train, and the impossibility of him being in the room where Don Pasquale was written, due to him being underground for most of the 18th century. We see that Toi has written Stuck in the Mud Again. Now, I don't know if this is a question, but knowing what sent Lestat underground all that time ago, all I can say is, ouch. We then get the context for the Halloween scene. Now, after Lestat discovers the existence of Louis and Daniel's book, he spends a number of days going over and over and over its contents. All the while, the band across the street are practicing, and it's driving Lestat mad that they keep going for the F. It's now Halloween, and Lestat is momentarily distracted by some trick-or-treaters. Now, just as a sign of how popular this book is, these children are notably dressed as Louis, Armand, and Claudia as Baby Lou, and also Claudia in her mustard-coloured dress. One of the kids is also dressed as a ghost, and I wonder if that is some foreshadowing for the future. And an additional note, I don't think it's a coincidence that the one child who gives Lestat the most headache, has the allergies, wants a specific type of sweet, is dressed as Armand from the 1940s. And I also think it's hilarious that Lestat was prepared for these trick-or-treaters with a bowl of sweets, a massive bowl of sweets. And finally, Lestat can take no more and he runs over to the band and tells them off. They are suitably impressed, and that's the story of how Lestat met his band. And just another side note that I wanted to point out, the little child that Lestat pushes out the way is dressed as Dracula. Now, something that I could be wrong, I could be completely wrong, but the little girl right next to the boy seems to be dressed as Claudia from the 1994 film. I wonder, what do you think? So, back to Detroit, after the concert, Lestat is messaging with Toi, and he's struggling, but he stopped himself from sending that message. Instead, he says that he misses them. Come to me. Okay, so on night 2 of Detroit, the Fang Gang try a different tactic to get Lestat. It seems that they sent Baby Jenks to be a honey trap for him. I'll explain that a little bit later. But before she can act, Lestat has a meltdown on stage, triggered by Larry refusing to take up the tambourine again. And just as Lestat is about to attack him, he is stopped in his tracks by his music and a lot of flashes. Now, buckle in, I'm going to break down every single one of them here. Okay, so we get a very quick shot of Gabriella, I think as a human. Then we get our very first shot of Magnus, and it looks like he is leaning over Lestat here. Then we see what I think is someone's wrist being pumped, but I'm not sure. Could it be how Lestat got his scars? We go back to Magnus, and it looks like he's opening up his throat to feed Lestat. We see Lestat as a human, and I think this is the night where Magnus took him. We see a shot of Louis in the crowd, and he is his muse. This is Louis from the 1940s or 30s. We get a shot of Lestat, and it looks like he's underground or has just been brought from underground. We get a shot of a fire, a huge fire, I think from Lestat's childhood. Then we see Lestat as a teenager being held down by his brothers, and he then goes on to stab one of his brothers at the dining table. We see Gabriella jumping on somebody, I think it might be Lestat, but I'm not sure, in their dining room. Then we see human Lestat on the night where he's being dragged by the leg by Magnus. Then we get a clearer shot that it is Magnus actually dragging him here. Then we see the moments that both Louis and Lestat were made. Louis by Lestat and Lestat by Magnus. We see Lestat falling in what I think might be the 1940s. We see Gabriella and Lestat about to kiss. We see Nikki flying at Lestat with an accusatory finger pointing at him. We see what I'm sure now is Magnus shaking Lestat out from under the ground and then allowing him to feed on him. We go from one mother to another, with Gabriella laying on a chaise longue to what I think is Akasha in her statue form. We then see Lestat lifting Louis in the air and then descending the stairs at the trial. Now, of course, this is in reverse. And finally, we get somebody removing some glasses from Lestat's face. Now, I don't know who this is. Do you? And after this really intense experience, Lestat and his band really unite. And the sound is transcendent. Now, in the mix of all of this, Baby Jenks takes herself on stage and Lestat feeds on her. Lestat overdoses on the drugs that Baby Jenks has in her system. It's similar to the effects that Louis felt after he fed on Daniel on that night in 1973. As Daniel, Dean and Christine try to revive Baby Jenks, Lestat can see her soul on the ceiling. Baby Jenks warns that those closest to Lestat are going to die, and are going to die bad, and that they are coming for him. Lestat is confused and demands clarity, but before he can get a real answer, Baby Jenks is revived. Later that night, Lestat joins his band at the opening of the hotel that they're staying in. Not only does he join them, but he crashes his car onto the red carpet. Now, just a side note, the license plate says Mojo. Now, for non-book readers, just know that Mojo is my absolute favourite character of them all. Now, it's not a book 4, so I won't spoil any more of that for you. Now, in the bathroom at the event, Lestat's voiceover explains some vampire physiology that we didn't get from Louis. He calls out some of Louis's lies and mistruths too, i.e. his scars, the bob, as one of you lovely commenters called it, and the fact that he never had Louis's initials embroidered on one of his suits. Tim and Russ, who are both members of the Tooth Team, no, sorry, they are called the Fang Gang, they finally approach Lestat, and Lestat compliments Russ's pelvic floor muscles, and they invite him to their coven house, and Lestat politely refuses. Now, their coven house is something that I want to speak about later in the spoiler section. Lestat is high and lonely, and he looks for his band, and Daniel tells him that they have gone upstairs. Now, although Lestat is tripping, he is aware, even if it's subconsciously, that the gang are circling. Lestat takes Dee and Baby Jinx, who is now recovered following the help of Dr. Fareed, upstairs, and they have a great time in the lifts. Now, whilst we're in the lifts, Lestat has a very, very detailed explanation of vampire sex. Now, what I would like to point out here are a few of what I think are really important stills. Now, I think most significantly, we see Lestat and Nikki, and I think they're humans here, embracing. And then we see Lestat on top of Nikki, and it looks by his hands that he is still human. There's another shot of Nikki and Lestat, but then we see Lestat on top of Gabriella. Now, I don't know that this is the same scene that we see here with somebody on top of Gabriella. Now, I think this is from the scene that we saw in the trailer. Now, we get a very, very short clip of this bottle of vodka, and it's onyx and ash. Now, I think this is fictional for the show. I can't find it anywhere. But it is really interesting. Now, I wonder if this is the vodka bottle that Lestat was referring to when he enters his vampire dressing room. We then get a quick shot of the tattoo on the back of Baby Jinx's neck. Now, initially, I thought it said killer, but it actually says kill her. And if you recall from season 1, episode 5, Claudia meets the vampire Bruce. She says that he doesn't kill like a Bruce. She says he kills like a killer. Now, refer to point 4 in my spoiler section if you want to know a little bit more about it. And speaking of point 4 in the spoilers, as they reach the 8th floor and they finish up, Baby Jinx tells them that she's getting married in a week. Baby Jinx's deception is seemingly revealed as Lestat turns around and he is faced with the Fang Gang. Lestat fights, but they do end up grabbing him, and he then has flashbacks to the night he turned Claudia, but also what I think looks like a vampire wedding. It looks like a wedding between him and Nikki. Russ reveals that the gang are actually the Children of Darkness reimagined, and that sends Lestat off the edge. He laughs his head off. And just in time, he is rescued by Daniel and Sam. Now they fight some more, and Lestat crashes through the door of the penthouse into the party. Now this is where the band discover Lestat's secret. DJ Sam also reintroduces himself to Lestat, and Daniel asks that question again. What about the stutter? Lestat escapes, and we find him a few days later, maybe I think, in a motel room. Now we have a look at his text. He's calling out desperately to Trois. He's begging them to please, please come. He needs them. They ask what his expectations are, and Lestat responds, none, nothing. He lets them know that he's in the Starlight Inn in room 14. He says that he loves them, and after they don't respond, he says, forget it, I'm fine, to hell with you. Finally, Trois responds that I'm here, and you see the look on Lestat's face. His mouth is open, and it's revealed that Trois is Gabriella. He's fledgling, his lover, his mother. Now, Lestat seems like a child in this moment, and initially I thought that the words were sticking in his throat because of the emotion, but I think it is actually his stutter. His stutter from when he was a child. It's coming back. He's in the presence of his mother. Lestat needed his mum, and he called out for her. But then we get this juxtaposition of Gabriella healing Lestat's cheek, but then falling onto the bed with him in a kiss. It's confusing and it's perplexing, but that's their relationship, and that's the end of the episode. Now, I wanted to get into the spoiler section. So, number 1, I wanted to speak about Louis' leg and Armand's eye. In the novel The Vampire Lestat, a member of the theatre troupe named Emily writes to Lestat after he's left them. She's writing about Nikki, and in her letter she lets him know that although limbs can be cut off, they do grow back for their kind in time. Now, those are appendages. I'm not sure about eyes yet, but we'll see. Now, I think that they incurred these injuries after a very, very big fight. Now, I don't want to go as far as to say who with just yet because we're so early on, but I will get into that as soon as we're given just a little hint. I'll get into that for you. And then point number 2, Raglan James. Again, I won't spoil the entire book, but in book number 4, and I'm not going to say the name of it either because that will completely give it away as well, but now what I will say is that I believe that Lestat was there at the auction. Now, think about the framing of Louis and Raglan. Think about the self-possessed way that Raglan now holds himself. Now, I think that this auction is after the events of book 3 and most of the way through book 4. Point number 3, Baby Jinx and a honey trap. Now, I wonder, did Baby Jinx plan to disable Lestat by taking as many drugs as she did, knowing that Lestat possibly feeds every night on stage? I think she might have. Now, I believe that Baby Jinx is a member of the Fang Gang, not only because of the books, but because of what we've seen so far. Now, the kill her on the back of her neck, I think, is sort of a play on Killer. And I think Killer is Bruce. And I think she is going to get married to Bruce. And that brings me on to point 4. Now, point 4 is the Coven House that Tim mentioned. Now, in the trailers, we've seen Louis chasing after Killer, chasing after Bruce. And he does go to a really big house in the middle of nowhere. Is this the place where Louis finds Bruce? And does he find him on their wedding day? In the trailer, we see that Louis says a congratulations to somebody on their big day. Is Killer's wedding to Baby Jinx that big day that he's speaking about? I don't know, but it's going to be big. It's going to be huge. Now, that's all the spoilers for this episode. I can't wait till next week. Thank you so much for watching. This is so fun. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. And I will see you in my next one. Thank you again. Thanks. Bye. Welcome to my channel. My name's Bissy, and episode 2 of The Vampire Lestat was incredible. Okay, and with that said, let's get into the breakdown. Okay, so we begin with the Leon Claws in the 18th century in Auvergne. We see just how their dynamic shaped the man that Lestat became, and ultimately at the root of the vampire he is now. A monk is speaking to Lestat's father about the gifts that Lestat would benefit from by attending their monastery for his education. His mother Gabriella wants Lestat to learn about Italian and Neapolitan philosophers. She corrects the monk to have him address her as he's answering her question. This exchange with the monk is our first and prime example of the treatment Gabriella received as a woman at that time. It shows that not even her nobility was a shield. As Lestat's father will not pay for his tuition, Gabriella finances his tuition with her brooch. And note, this is an Easter egg, as Gabriella in the novel, she's Gabrielle, would often buy Lestat gifts instead of showing him softness and the love that he needed in that moment too. Also, in Season 1, Episode 1, Lestat explains to Louis' family that his mother used to lavish him with his beloved gifts. His flintlock rifle, his dogs, and in the novel, the chestnut horse too. Another thing to note is that Lestat's father's eyes become progressively more cloudy as the years go on. Now that, I believe, is a nod to the novel Interview with the Vampire, as an Easter egg, because by the time that he and Lestat travel to America, he is blind. Some years later, Lestat responds to Gabriella's challenge by going to do what his father and brothers would not. The villagers are begging for help with the wolves that are wreaking havoc. The Leonclaws are feasting as the villagers suffer. This is an interesting change from the novel, as Lestat's family were incredibly cash poor despite their nobility. Lestat actually used to hunt for their meat. Something else that I found interesting was that Lestat was actually loading his rifle before Gabriella screams for the men at that table to be men. Lestat loses his horse and his beautiful dog, but wins the battle against 8 wolves. This is how we learn how Lestat received his scars. Now, in the novel, this story is really, really big. It's so impactful for him. And earlier on in the episode, or I believe actually it was in episode 1, Lestat said that he allowed the tale of the wolf killer to become his identity for a while. So I think and I hope that we will be coming back to this section again. As Lestat mourns, Gabriella rubs ointment into his open wounds, as she recounts a dream that she had, where she felt that she belonged to no one. She was owned by no one. She is in control as she gropes Lestat as he cries on the floor. However, Lestat wants to be the only one who possesses Gabriella. As she walks away from him, the sound of her footsteps get louder and louder and louder as she walks further and further away. And that, to me, is the most powerful example that we have so far of what abandonment feels like to Lestat. Okay, so back on the tour bus, the band is understandably shocked and scared at the discovery that Lestat was not play acting. He's a real vampire. Lestat seems to be jealous that Daniel was flirting with Sophia, aka Gabriella. Sophia being the cover alias that she's using at this time. When Larry calls a band-only meeting, Lestat checks that Gabriella is still outside when she leaves the bus. Now, I wonder, will Gabriella and Christine clash, or will they appreciate each other? I wonder because Christine has been acting as something almost as a substitute for the space that Gabriella usually fills. In episode 1, Lestat goes into almost childlike mode when he wants to take the car and Christine says no. And later on in this episode, during the call in the club, Christine says, call an Uber and go to Coffin, as you would with a teenager. Get home and go to bed. And of course, they're lovers too. Lestat finally answers the band's questions and they speak frankly. This is where we find that Alex is in recovery. He doesn't even swear, a man after my own heart. And it all gets just a bit too much for him. Now, I wondered if Lestat felt abandoned by Alex as he walks away, and Lestat leaves him with a stark threat. After the band meeting, we spend the night with Gabriella and Lestat. Lestat explains that Gabriella as a human was a complicated hang, whereas the vampire Gabriella is not. She's just arrived, but Lestat is already concerned about her leaving. We learn that Lestat saw her at only 2 points in the 20th century. Now, skipping ahead, I think we get an answer to when those 2 occasions were. Gabriella says to Lestat in the Italian restaurant, I only ever saw the aftermath, your slit throat slow to heal, your rotten bathrobe sticking to your skin. So once, in 1940 after Mardi Gras, and the second, sometime before or soon after, Louis finds Lestat in his robe at the end of season 2. It brings to mind that quote, if you need me, call me, but make sure you need me. Now, I just can't remember where that's from, but maybe you can help me out in the comments. But that just keeps running around my head whenever I think of these moments. We see that Lestat mimics Gabriella's speech. Of course, of course. Is this how Cabbage started? Lestat is the one who tries to set a boundary and says that they cannot continue their physical relationship. So their hunting kind of feels like a substitute for sex for them. Well, they try at least. And again, I think that's another nod to the novel, The Vampire Lestat, where I think they didn't go as far as physical sex, but they did kiss a lot and swap hot blood in their cold lips. Yeah, all of that. They follow their prey to a club, and Gabriella holds a pair of ping pong balls in the palm of her hands. And she really holds them in her hand. In fact, she tosses them. Whilst hunting, the Talamasca are watching them. Gabriella mentions the Great Conversion. Now, this proves that she knows the term. So she isn't quite as out of touch as I presumed. Is she involved? I wonder. Now, another note is that Lestat mentions that being with Gabriella is fun, just like finding party invites in the pockets of his victims. Now, that's a nod to the 1994 film, where Tom Cruise's Lestat says this to Brad Pitt's Louis. And I'm so sorry, I can't remember if this is in the novel Interview with the Vampire 2. And finally, Lestat has an unwelcome visit from a muse, his brother. A meeting with Mr. Pitt. Now, Christine arranges a meeting for Lestat to discuss the damage at the hotel, and Lestat has to pay in unconventional ways. Just as a side note, I found it hilarious that Lestat put on a shirt and a blazer to go and meet Thomas Pitt. Now, of course, this turns out to be Louis. Now, I wanted to add this comment here because I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And as soon as I read it, I couldn't believe that I missed it. But thank you so much, Angela, for bringing it to my attention. Such an amazing spot. Thank you so much. Now, we've seen the scene in the trailers and I go over it in detail in one of my breakdowns. But what I wanted to point out is that I agree with Louis that it does feel like Lestat has been screaming for help, specifically from Louis. And Louis flew in and he's here, whether Lestat likes it or not. So after the concert where Lestat floats up to Louis and hands him a copy of the book, we move on to Daniel and Louis' meeting. Now, just like the novel The Vampire Lestat, Lestat addresses his audience and says that he will be speaking for others, even if he wasn't there. Now, Lestat said it. He awakens the Queen and unleashes her wrath upon the world. Now, this is a spoiler that I'm going to go into quite some detail in the spoiler section. Point 1. Daniel speaks to Louis about his bond with Armand. He says that he experiences this thing where everyone disappears and he feels Armand. And on a side note, I wonder if this is how Gabriella knows when Lestat is actually calling out to her, because they can't speak telepathically. So now that Daniel has mentioned their bond in the show, I'm going to read some passages from the novels just to give you some context in the spoiler section. And that's going to be in point 2. In his conversation with Louis, Daniel speaks about his limitations and his motives for publishing after Armand turned him. Louis feels like he is chasing ghosts after he thinks he sees Claudia in New York. Now, spoiler section point 3, I'll be speaking about this specifically, but I will note here that there are ghosts within the Chronicles. And we may see Claudia in some form or another soon. Remember, she did promise that if there was a way, she would find it. Now, Daniel has hoodwinked Louis into meeting his producers, in inverted commas, those producers being from the Talamasca, Raglan James and Rashid, real Rashid. Now, I want to highlight one thing in this conversation. Now, Ragland is really emphasizing some words, his pronunciation of some words, getting us used to his speech pattern, I think. And I think this is going to be a really important point to remember going forward. Now, again, this is going to be point 4 of the spoiler section. And back with Lestat and Gabriella, we can see that Lestat is still sensitive about Claudia, even with Gabriella. And that warning look that he gives her says it all. And just a side note, it's at this point that I realised that Gabriella and Louis had never even actually met, as Louis didn't know that she was alive, and Gabriella seems fascinated by his picture. I mean, she was staring at him during the concert. Lestat sings in French to the melody that he was writing when he and Louis were FaceTiming. Remember, Louis called it nice. This song plays over the scenes of Gabriella's turn-in, and the massacre of their family plays out. Now, this is a change from the novel The Vampire Lestat, and I absolutely love that we're in uncharted territory with this. Now, at the start of the sequence, we see that Lestat is talking to Nicholas, but it ends with Lestat listening to the screams of his nieces and nephews as they discover their parents' bodies. Now, you can see that Gabriella is taking the glasses off of Lestat's face just before he turns her, and I think this is her discovering his true nature by seeing his eyes, the change in his eyes. Lestat then goes on to try and justify his and Gabriella's relationship, a knowingly weak attempt in my opinion. And it seems that he thinks so too, because he gives up pretty quickly. Okay, and back to Raglan and Rashid. What on earth happened in Dubai? Now, was this after Louis' speech at the end of season 2? He gave his name, he gave his address. I wonder, and 32 were massacred. Now, the 32nd is a very interesting one. Louis mentioned that Daniel Talbot was victim number 32. Now, if you saw my reaction video, then you saw my face as soon as Louis mentioned this name. I've been waiting for this name to be dropped, and I can't believe it has. So please refer to the spoiler section, part 5, for more details. I'm going right into it. Now, the main thing that I took from this exchange was even Louis is able to be manipulated by the Talamasca. He, of course, would have gone after the Fang Gang if he knew who their leader was. But they are enlisting him to do their work by giving him the motivation that serves him. Which doesn't feel very good to me. I don't know, how about you? Okay, so that brings us very nicely onto the spoiler section. Now, Lestat actually said it. He said that he awakens the Queen and unleashes her wrath upon the world. Now, this is basically the plot to the Queen of the Damned. So Queen of the Damned takes place at the same time pretty much as the events of the Vampire Lestat. However, in the novel, we hear from Lestat the details of the build-up from many different characters' perspectives. Now, we are going to meet Marius very soon, I hope. And Marius is the current keeper of those who must be kept. And if you cast your mind back, you might have caught Lestat's slip in season 1 about those who must be kept being in Greece. I won't spoil how, but eventually Lestat is introduced to those who must be kept, who, of course, are Akasha and Enkil, the Egyptian king and queen who became the very first vampires, the source of all vampires. Now, Akasha is taken with Lestat from afar, and she visits him at night, although Lestat doesn't quite know or understand what he's being faced with. Eventually, Lestat's music awakens Akasha, and boy, does she have a war to wage. Now, I think I'm going to leave it there, but this is very significant, as I think that Louis and Armand's injuries might have been inflicted by Akasha during these events. Okay, so moving on to point 2, Daniel and Armand's bond. So I think the best thing for me to do would be to read a little bit from The Queen of the Damned for you, because I think this is a really good example of what Daniel might have been explaining to Louis in that conversation. Have a listen to this. So in part 1, The Road to the Vampire Lestat, chapter 4, the story of Daniel, the devil's minion, or the boy from Interview with the Vampire. He'd awakened with a sense of urgency, dread. Something terrible going to happen. Something going to happen to all of us. and that was the first time he had connected it with Lestat. He'd wanted to pick up the phone then. It was 4 o'clock in the morning in Miami. Why the hell hadn't he done it? Armand would have been sitting on the terrace of the villa, watching the tireless fleet of white boats win their way back and forth from the night island. Yes, Daniel? That sensuous, mesmerizing voice. Come down and tell me where you are, Daniel. But Daniel hadn't called. 6 months had passed since he had left the night island. And this time, it was supposed to be for good. He had once and for all forsworn the world of carpets and limousines and private planes, of a quiet, overwhelming presence of his immortal lover, who gave him every earthly possession he could want. But now it was cold, and he had no room, no money, and he was afraid. You know where I am, you demon. You know what Lestat's done, and you know I want to come home. What would Armand say to that? But I don't know, Daniel. I listen, I try to know, but I'm not God, Daniel. Never mind. Just come, Armand. Now that's not very far into the chapter. And to me, this is a great example of how Armand and Daniel are bonded. Now, at this point in the novel, Daniel is still mortal. He hasn't been turned just yet. He wants to be, but he hasn't been. But we know that this is very different to the show. But I think the bond is still there. And it's very much, I think, what Daniel is explaining to Louis, although he doesn't quite understand it yet. Okay, and point 3 is Claudia's ghost. So also in the novel Queen of the Damned, there's a character named Jessie who meets Ghost Claudia in the old home in New Orleans. Now she is actually the one who jumps on stage in the book, and Lestat feeds on her, over Baby Jenks in the show. Plus, she's also a descendant of a very, very important character that hasn't yet been mentioned in the show, but I'll be right onto that as soon as they do. Now, I know that there are more details about Ghost in the book Merrick, but unfortunately, I haven't gotten that far just yet, I'm afraid. So I'd love to see readers of the book's comments about what happens in that book. But please, 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 before you do, please add a spoiler warning at the beginning of the comment, just to respect anyone who doesn't want to be spoiled. Thank you so much. I'd really appreciate it. Okay, so point 4 is Raglan's speech pattern. Now, I tried not to give everything away last week, but that quickly got out of control. But very briefly, Raglan is a rascal. We've seen evidence of this in Talamasca, where he tricked Guy Anatole. But he also tricks Lestat, and Lestat finds himself stuck in Raglan's body, on a quest to get his original body back, with help from somebody who I'm going to mention in point 5. So in this episode, I believe that we're seeing the real Raglan in his own body. It seems like we're getting to know his mannerisms, his distinctive speech pattern, also that we might be able to spot the differences in time. However, I have to also wonder if something else is going on, as it all seems so on the nose, if that makes any sense. But at the same time, maybe I'm just looking too closely, and people who don't know what might be coming might not pick up on these clues until the season's done. Now, that was very much the case for me when I first watched seasons 1 and 2 with Armand. I mean, I don't know, I could be wrong, I could be completely misunderstanding. What do you think? Okay, so now we get to point 5. David Talbot. Now we meet David in The Queen of the Damned, and we really get to know him in The Tale of the Body Thief. Now David is Lestat's friend and mentor, and he's a Talamasca agent who is very, very skilled and gifted. He's also instrumental in Lestat's quest to get his body back. Now this is a major, major spoiler, but David doesn't want to be turned. He wants to remain human. But during the course of the book, David also switches bodies, and Lestat turns him by force. Now a vampire, David also takes down Armand's autobiography in The Vampire Armand. Now, I haven't finished The Vampire Armand yet. I had to put it down. It is very, very heavy, for me anyway. So that's all I can comment on right now. But I have to wonder, is David actually dead? Given his special skills, i.e. he can jump into other bodies too. But at the same time, I did wonder whether we would ever see him, as the character Daniel has been given many of his qualities, namely his age and the fact that he's conducting interviews with vampires other than Louis. So I wonder if Daniel might end up switching bodies at some point too. I hope not, but I do wonder. Now that's all of the spoilers for this week. Thank you so much for watching. So if you enjoyed this video, please do subscribe and I will see you next week. Thank you. Bye. Welcome to my channel. My name's Bissy, and the heartbreak and discomfort in this episode was visceral. I've got to tell you, this breakdown's been the most difficult one I've ever had to make. Lestat's reluctance is palpable. and I felt as drained and confused as Daniel must have. But Lestat's staunch denial of the train accusation is so much clearer to me now. This episode was incredibly heavy. It was brutal. Okay, and with that said, let's get into the breakdown. The episode opens on Lestat and Gabriella hunting. They seem to have fallen into a devious routine. And simply, Gabriella is a menace. She's a terrible influence in my opinion. Or is she providing the exact distraction that Lestat wanted? Or that he needed from her? Daniel and Christine are trying to keep some kind of schedule going. And whilst Daniel was trying to get Lestat to the studio to film, Dr. Farid mentions a study in Budapest where 2 Class B vampires survived decapitation for 2 hours. He also mentions that somebody of Lestat's caliber could survive more. Now this is foreshadowing, I think, to Louis's rampage. Now I made a video recently breaking down every vampire in the Immortal universe. If you haven't already, do check that out. I think you'll find it interesting. But my questions for now are, who's conducting these studies? To what end? And who's reading the papers? And are they being published? Another thing to note is that Daniel mentions the other 2 attempts on Lestat's life during this tour. Now these attempts are outside the Detroit attack. Will we get any more info on this? I wonder. We also learned that Daniel was changed by Armand on the 18th of July 2022. Now this is so crucial, as the last session with Louis and Armand took place on the 26th of June 2022, where Daniel exposed Armand's seismic lie and Louis told Armand to not lay a finger on him. So Armand changed Daniel on the 22nd day after that event. What happened in those 22 days? Does Daniel remember? Is this the trauma? Did Armand keep him for all that time? What do you think? Also, Lestat says Daniel's brief life. What happens to Daniel? Lestat later mentions that Daniel's seed of hatred will be watered later in the sun. Is this how Daniel ends? Or did Lestat mean something would happen to him and Daniel's seed of anger will be watered as he witnesses this? What do you think? Then we get into the interview itself, and Lestat's reluctance is so clear. Daniel continues to prod at Lestat's stutter. We learn that he had the stutter between the ages of 9 and 29. But Lestat worries to Christine that Daniel was trying to entrap him with these questions about his stutter. But what could that mean? Do you have any theories? Because I'm at a complete loss. Lestat goes on to mention that this entire endeavour is not about asses on seats or streams on Pandora. Now, just a note, I didn't know that there actually was a streaming service called Pandora. So I got very excited when I heard the name, as there's a significant character in the future with this name. And I'll explain why in the spoiler section. Point 1. Lestat admits that the inciting incident, the thing that happened that seemingly caused his stutter, was the sight of witnessing so-called witches being burnt at the stake, when he was just 9 years old. However, he thinks, looking back on it now, that the twins were definitely witches. Now, there are a pair of twins who are witches in the Chronicles, but I don't think these are who he's referring to. But as soon as they are brought up, I'll go right into that. Lestat says that the point of the songs are pure expression. He's also said that he's doing a rewrite. So why is he playing games? Lestat ends the interview by dropping a bombshell on Daniel. He mentions his mother for the first time, which is a trip, as she of course is in the room. Gabriella herself is playing mind games with Lestat by instructing Yada to put on the Lestat wig and then going with him so very loudly into the bathroom. I found it interesting that Lestat thought that Daniel had left his mother out of the book on purpose. Did he really speak to Louis about Gabriella? I mean, he says, no room for the many hours I spoke of her. I guess. Lestat only introduced his mother into the story for Daniel after she and Yada came back from their bathroom break. He's seething. And I believe that this is one of the precious moments of something real we get from Lestat that night. We then cut to the farm. Louis does exactly what Raglan James and the Talamasker wanted. He's on mission and looking for Killer, dispensing of every member of the Fang Gang in his path. Dr. Farid's foreshadowing comes into play as we see the headless vampire on the floor as Louis tries to read his jumbled thoughts. Now, did we just see Louis use the cloud gift? Or was it a graceful jump? Now to me, this shows that Louis does indeed have the cloud gift. I mean, it looked to me that he propelled himself at will. He didn't just launch into a jump, in my opinion. So this then begs the question, when did Louis learn to harness the cloud gift? Did he have it whilst in Dubai? Were we wrong about Armand keeping the bookshelves out of Louis' reach? Did he outright lie to Daniel about having the gift? Or did he discover that he had it and then learn to harness it after he left Armand? It's been about 3 years since then, and we're seeing that Louis has a new vampire relationship and new connections. What do you think? And then notably, Louis sets the captives free, and you see his planning as he has a vehicle waiting for them outside. Now, I thought this was pretty great of Louis, as yes, he's on a mission, but he is not the monster here. Not tonight. Okay, now we get to Nicholas. As Lestat starts his story, his hand is the main focus of the frame. In fact, his hands are the focus of many of the frames during this interview. Lestat tells Daniel that he meets up with Nicholas in Paris. He's no longer going by Leoncourt. In fact, he's dropped his title completely. Did Nicky's dad actually send him, or was Lestat looking for Nicholas? It seems like Lestat doesn't like anyone else calling Nicholas Nicky. He corrects Claudio in season 1, and again Daniel here. And for the first time, Lestat portrays himself as a little awkward at 29. None of the dangerously intoxicating charisma that oozes out of him in other scenes. Lestat stops the story abruptly and calls Nicholas his bipolar boyfriend. He says that he was severely depressed. Lestat looks at Gabriella when he says his first love. Was this because we have more of the story to hear? It seemed that Lestat was speaking directly to the audience when he says, fast forward, stop, vape, check your phone, press play. Oh good, now he's a vampire. Whilst Lestat is describing how he trained himself out of his stutter, he's got his eye on Gabriella and Yada. He's distracted, but not so distracted as to actually let Daniel all the way in. Not just yet. Lestat calls Nicky his first love, not a great love. Now, what did I just watch was how I felt when I watched this unfold for the first time. I'm not so surprised that they made changes to the book. In spoiler section point 2, I'll go into every book difference point by point. But I've also made a video on Nicky and Lestat's entire relationship from the book, if you'd like to see how that played out in its entirety. Now, for anyone who's watched more than a few of my videos, you'll know how optimistic and positive I am. You'll also know that I absolutely love this show, so it won't surprise you that I'm hoping that we'll get a fuller, more rounded and less biased version of their time together. Now, when I say biased, I mean Lestat's bias, as he has a lot of guilt over the events, and that of course has coloured his retelling in my opinion. From the scenes that we did get, it seemed that Lestat is blaming himself entirely for Nicky's end. He almost frames Armand as someone who acted with mercy in the end. Almost. Lestat says that he destroyed Nicky. And feeling like that, I can completely understand this framing. Whether this is how it actually happened, or simply how he wants to frame the events to Daniel, I don't know. It seemed like he believed that he drove Nicholas into madness with his gaslighting. He was different, he had changed, and Nicky noticed, but Lestat kept telling him that what he was seeing was not what he was seeing. And that is maddening. But then Lestat breaks and asks Nicholas, do you want me to take your life? And Nicky screams that he wants Lestat to love him enough to give it to him. Then Lestat says that Nicholas cut off his own hands, as Lestat begs him to stop. Nicky then asks Lestat to cut the other. Lestat can't, but all he can do is hold Nicky. He says that Armand throws Nicholas into the fire and pins him down through the chest, as Lestat watches. And just a note, did you notice Daniel's face when he thought he was getting something real? It wasn't the empathetic Daniel from Dubai. He looked like he was in the throes of increasing wonder, so to speak. Armand said it in season 2. This is his drug. Daniel brings up the fact that Lestat sings about his abuser every night. Now, Lestat cannot or won't accept the term. Instead, he calls Magnus his liberator. We see a version of Lestat's turning. The story is framed in a stylized way, like a music video from the 90s in my opinion. It actually made me think of David Brent's self-funded cover of Simply Red's If You Don't Know Me By Now. But the sinister and terrifying nature of Magnus's intrusion and obsession can only be masked for so long. As Magnus sits and drinks opposite the etching of Lestat, the reality of the darkness creeps through, as we see the bodies of his previous victims hanging above the table like some kind of grotesque chandelier. Lestat's denial and reluctance is at its most apparent during this section. And heartbreakingly, we find out exactly why very soon. Back with Louis, it seems like it's Bruce and Baby Jenks' wedding night. We see that Bruce has Baby Jenks' name tattooed on his hand, similar in style to the one on the back of her neck. Bruce and Baby Jenks speak about making a baby that night, as they discover Louis waiting for him in the basement. Louis sits calmly, after what he had just done, and before what he's about to do. And this calm is chillingly comforting to me. Bruce, of course, doesn't know who Louis is at this point, and tries to attack, but Louis is faster. Louis incapacitates Bruce and sits him down to listen. Louis reads Claudia's words from the torn-up pages of her diary. Now, in a way, now that we know their contents, I'm so glad that Louis kept them from Daniel. I'm glad that 2022 Daniel didn't have access to these words. In his hands, at that time, I don't believe he would have handled them as delicately as they deserve to be. He didn't love Claudia. He didn't know the full story of her tragically short life. We saw what he did when Louis expressed the haunting memory. Daniel was still getting to grips with his subject back then. So not hearing Claudia's words until Louis recited them to the perpetrator, well, to me, it felt just. It felt fitting that the ears hearing them are those of the monster who inflicted those horrors. And most fittingly, that they are the last words he heard before his own end. Louis sets him alight with those pages, and Bruce burns. Now, initially, I worried that Louis walked away too soon. But then we see Baby Jenks sifting through Bruce's ashes. She finds his wedding ring, and now this is what worries me. I mean, she isn't going to leave it at that, is she? Now, on a side note, I wondered if Baby Jenks had been turned, but I'm not sure, as her nails are ombre French, as opposed to the milky white we see from most vampires. I mean, she could have had her nails done for her wedding, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. Once it's done, Louis takes a call from Lemuel? He's checking on him, and I wonder what their relationship is actually like. They seem to communicate well. They seem to be on the same page. Could this actually be Louis' healthiest relationship so far? And back to Claudia's words. They play over Lestat's actual memory of his turning. You can see the piles of bodies in the tower behind Lestat. And they haunt him now in the backseat of his car. Magnus violated Lestat in more than one way. And who knows how many times it happened. The look on Lestat's face... The look on Lestat's face when the assault is over, before Magnus bit him, I mean, it's just so incredibly heartbreaking. And as I mentioned in my intro, Lestat being accused of threatening something that he himself had suffered, well, I can see exactly why he was so furious. I can see how reading those words in a book that millions have read could have undone him. We hear Magnus say to Lestat the lines that he recited to himself in season 2 after the trial. Lestat couldn't or wouldn't tell the full story of his turn into Daniel. The scenes we saw, the Muse's hauntings, were so incredibly difficult to watch, and they'd be even more difficult to recount to a journalist that you don't trust. Impossible even. Magnus mentions the ghosts that sit at the long table. They've been waiting for him, and I think Lestat is going to face them very soon. He's been trying to keep them down for a while, it seems. Trying by giving them their songs. Magnus alludes to 7 seats. The hand, Nikki. The finger, Antoinette. The pimp, 20th century Louis. The drummer, TC. What's going to happen to TC? Claudia, his mother, and Lestat himself. But there are 8 places at the table. Is Magnus the last seat? And of course, we have Daniel in the ceiling. As Lestat drives, we see explosions in the background, and the lights of the CN Tower go out. But before Lestat plays his gig, he walks away from a crash. But in the background of that scene, you see the CN Tower is lit and intact. There are things happening simultaneously here, and I cannot wait to catch up. Now at the gig, Lestat plays The Loneliness, a more apt song I cannot imagine. He can't distract himself anymore. He has to feel these terrifying emotions. He's going to have to face the long table and come out on the other side, whatever that looks like. But I have nothing but questions from the gig. Like, what's going to happen with the videos of Lestat levitating? The crowd is screaming that he's floating. Where did the blood come from on his guitar? Was he just playing so hard? Where did Muse Magnus go? And side note, I thought this gig might have taken place on day 24 shooting, as TC's outfit is the same from the Instagram reel of the band. But looking at it again, I'm not sure, as Alex is in the reel, and prior to this, Daniel said that he had been trying to get something out of Lestat for over 2 months. So yeah, maybe not. Regina. Now, what can I say? I already had a lump in my throat at this scene. Louis had done it. He's avenged the terrible wrong that was done to Claudia. He can't tell Claudia directly. He can't commiserate with her. But he can visit a face that looks very much like hers. Claudia's words were spoken to that monster. No matter how difficult it was for Louis to say, or how difficult it was for us as an audience to hear, Claudia had the last say. And that to me is perfect. Louis visits the diner and we meet Regina. Her mustard uniform is very reminiscent of the last dress that Claudia wore. Just another dagger in my heart and a scene that I'll be thinking about for a very, very long time. And finally, we catch up with Alex. Now he's still in Ohio and he's struggling. Alex is missing being with the band and finding it difficult to watch their growing success without him. He shares in this meeting, a safe place to be vulnerable. However, this safe place has been infiltrated by someone. Armand. Now, I'm not saying that Armand wouldn't benefit from a meeting like this. I believe he is addicted. But what does he feel that he's addicted to? I thought that he could seriously use therapy to heal. But there is always an angle with Armand. And sadly, I still have a massive question mark over his motives for being at this particular meeting, at this particular time, in this particular country, and with that particular accent. Okay, so that's the end of the breakdown. And for anyone who is staying around, let's get into them. So point 1 is Pandora. Now, Pandora was a great love of Marius, Armand's maker. We meet her quite early on, but it's not until deeper into the chronicles that she gets her own novel. Now, I haven't read her novel, so I can't give too much away about her story, but let me know in the comments if you have. Of course, with a spoiler warning. Now, I did want to get into book changes, and that was point number 2. So this is going to be specifically about Nicky and his story. And like I said earlier, I did an entire video on Lestat and Nicky's time together. So do check that out if you want the whole story. But very quickly, most of the changes from the book are: Nicky handed a Wolfline cloak to Lestat on behalf of a grateful village. They then spent hours in a private dining room where their attraction became known. Gabriella, or Gabrielle in the book, financed their move to Paris. They travelled to Paris together. Now, Nicky already had a darkness about him, a darkness that Lestat was attracted to. Lestat leaves Nicky and their new friends after Magnus turns him, but he can't stay away for too long. However, ultimately, Lestat is turned off by Nicky after he turns him. Lestat and Gabrielle leave for good, and it's after he's away that he receives a letter that explains that Armand had kept Nicky captive for 5 nights without sustenance. This is after Nicky's mental state declines further. Armand also cuts off both of Nicky's hands and left him locked up in a room with his violin, unable to play. When the troupe begged Armand, he finally released Nicky. Nicky then puts his fare in order and ordered the troupe to witness him throw himself into a huge pyre. Now, of course, that is different to the story that we got in the show, and that is why I was so confused with what we were seeing. I didn't know whether it was the step reframing the events because of his guilt, or this is the story that the show is telling us. And I think ultimately I've settled on the latter. This is the story in the show. It needs to sink in, but ultimately it is tragic, it's heartbreaking, and I cannot wait to see where they take us. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and I will see you in my next one. Thanks, bye! Welcome to my channel. My name's Bissy, and it didn't feel like 9 days to me either. Wow, this episode was the 2 in this 1-2 punch of painful episodes to me. Now, we've got a lot to get into this episode, so with that said, let's get into the breakdown. The episode begins with the band being pulled over by a policeman. Lestat scares and impresses the band by reaching into the policeman's mind and making it all go away. TC thinks for the first time that she could become a vampire. Now this line made me wonder, does she really want to become a vampire when something goes wrong with her turning? Is this how she ends up at the long table? We see that Daniel was completely unaffected by the debauchery. As he chills in his hanging coffin, is that what that is? And side note, I've had to remind myself that we haven't actually met real Daniel this season yet. He wasn't at the auction as far as we've seen. And this Daniel is Lestat's recording of Lestat telling us, or the auction winner, about his experience with Daniel in 2025. We also get mention of Chekhov's manifesto in this first act. And of course, the gun does fire in the third. We move on to Louis, who sat in the diner watching Regina. Now, I just wanted to note that Louis' position in the diner gets closer and closer to Regina as the episode progresses. He starts off far away by the front door and then ends up right at the bar as she works. Lestat mentions that Louis is far more feared now than wanted by the other vamps. We also learn that Regina isn't from New York, she's from East London, and Lestat says that being in the same place with her brings more comfort than ending Bruce did. Now, I just wanted to add another note here, that the way Lestat says her was interesting to me, in the sentence when he says, in being in the same place with her. It's almost like he's the only one who's able to distinguish the difference. It reminded me of Louis' version of Claudia's turning, when Lestat said, "You don't know this girl." This version of Claudia, well, Lestat's telling of Regina's impression, well, what has Louis gotten himself into? What has Regina walked into? And back on the bus, it seems that Larry and Alex never lost contact, despite Alex walking away. And bless Salamander, he's trying to write songs. However, I really enjoyed how Lestat actually seemed to be encouraging him, and so was TC. I mean, even though all of this is happening on the bus, Lestat is still calling out to Gabriella. And speaking of Gabriella, Daniel says, "So, let's talk about your mother." Now, Muse Nikki drops a heavy truth when speaking about Gabriella. Now, similarly to Dreamstat, Muse Nikki is from Lestat's own mind. So it's his own subconscious that says that Gabriella is a great love, not his first love. We flash back to soon after Gabriella and Lestat have left Armand. Gabriella jokes that they could say that the coffin on top of the wagon belongs to their uncle Marius. Now, there's a little bit more on this in the spoiler section. But what I wanted to note here is that this seems pretty soon after Nikki's passing. And to me, Lestat isn't showing any signs that he's being plagued by Nikki's death. Now, my theory is that the version of his time with Nikki that Lestat gifted Daniel was not the entire truth. In the novel, Lestat and Nikki break up before Nikki's end. Now, this is also what Lestat tells Claudia in season 1. Now, of course, this is Louis' memory, but he was there. And it's only after they break up that they leave Paris. And it was whilst he was away that he received news of Nikki's passing and the treatment by Armand. So if there is a little bit more to the story, it would make sense that he's in good spirits as he leaves Paris. I mean, if I'm right, Nikki is suffering, but he's still alive at this point. Well, it makes sense to me anyway, but it's just a theory. And most probably, it's wishful thinking. What do you think? Now, Lestat lies about Gabriella and says she would not hunt. Now, I've been racking my brain. Where was that from? I feel like it's in one of the books, but I can't remember, and I just didn't have time to go through everything to find out. Can any book readers help me out? And then on a side note, I also wanted to mention Dr. Farid's story. It was only a few lines, but the delivery was so moving. And for a moment, it was nice in a way that Lestat seemed so much more, or should I say so much less formal with Dr. Farid than Louis ever did. Another note, what was Dr. Farid actually doing? Was Lestat feeding intravenously? Or was Dr. Farid taking blood from him? We also learned that Armand turned Daniel on a private jet. And my lasting thought was, what went on in those 22 days? My goodness. Now, of course, they travelled by private jet in The Queen of the Damned. But what does this mean for the show? Does Daniel remember anything? And speaking of Daniel and Armand, we get their long-awaited reunion. And just the sight of Armand completely throws Daniel off his game immediately. His anger is palpable. He calls Armand a boy, and to me, it sounded like he meant the original meaning of the phrase, the meaning that originated in American prisons. He also calls him a friendless bottom twink. Ouch. Now Armand continues to force himself onto Daniel when he starts to read the letter that's all about how much he's hurt Daniel. He didn't ask if he could. He didn't care to know how Daniel would feel about hearing it. He just launched straight into it, which demonstrates to me that this exercise was not about Daniel, not at all. It was for Armand, and for Armand only. Now, I wanted to make another note here of Armand's accent. Now, it has been bothering me this entire season. Why is it French again? Now, I went on a long journey thinking about this week. I spent way too much time thinking about it. And I think ultimately, and unfortunately, the answer comes back to the fact that this is Lestat's version of Armand. He knew him as Parisian Armand, not Dubai Armand with a British accent. Now, a double side note, just how he acquired that British accent is really strange to me. I mean, he travelled with Louis for all those years, but Louis didn't pick up an accent. Now, I do wonder if Daniel really didn't get any particular powers from Armand. Does Armand's blood really suck? Or is it because Daniel's been out on his own for 2 years without his maker, without a mentor? Back with Louis and Regina, they seem to be bonding. Regina's done her research on Thomas Pitt and confronts him about his watching her. Now initially, Louis doesn't want to put the truth on her, but Regina says she wants to know. And Louis, in an act of surprising honesty, and honesty that he didn't always extend to the real Claudia, tells Regina that the book, Interview with the Vampire, is real. Now that's as far as he can go in that moment, but that's enough to inspire Regina to read the book for herself. We see a memory of Gabriella and Lestat in a tavern in Italy. Gabriella is approached by a man who recognizes her from her mortal life. Now he doesn't know that it's actually her, and she goes on to tell Lestat that she's no longer a marquise. She's no longer a wife. She's no longer a mother. She is now death. We jump back to 2025. We're in Albany and Alex is catching up with Larry. Now, Alex pointedly doesn't describe Armand as his sponsor, but I'm presuming that this is Armand that we're speaking about, following their meeting. Now, this new person in Alex's life has erased some really painful memories from his mind, the bad things that he felt he was putting onto others. And Alex seems so incredibly zealous right now. It's actually pretty scary. Also, if it is Armand, and I believe it is, he hasn't withheld the fact that he's a vampire. But he is withholding some of his powers, the cloud gift in particular. And my goodness, he does have Alex convinced of his power, doesn't he? Alex isn't even free to say his name to his brother. And over to Lestat and Daniel. Daniel fights back at Lestat and brings up the fact that he dropped Louis. He asks if that was love too. Now, I really do wonder if we will get Lestat's version of that night at any point. Now, Gabriella is not true to her word and she doesn't show up in Albany. Lestat is breaking. And whilst he's leaving a voicemail for Gabriella, we the audience get flashes of Lestat with his mother in that bedroom and of an eye. Now, I think that eye is on the screen behind him as well. Her abandoning him is directly connected to the abuse, in my opinion. Or should I say, her control over him through sex and love. Now we flash back to Italy and the "it annoyed me" scene was wild. The waves crashing in the background as Lestat walks in on Gabriella. I mean, the sound of her leaving him is always in the back of his mind, just like those footsteps in episode 1. Now, in the most uncomfortable scene in this entire series for me, Gabriella tells Lestat that she loves him, which gives him all he's ever wanted from her. He's annoyed by her loudness with the man from the tavern. Her response is, and? Lestat says that on the day when he killed the wolves and she tended his wounds, they were mother and son. Now the unsaid thing, in my opinion, was, we were mother and son and you touched me like that. You were my mother and I needed my mother, but you didn't want to be what I needed. You touched me like that and that's all I could get from you. I was your son. You were my mother. You were my mother. Lestat then gets on top of her and with the man from the tavern's body right next to them, well, we all saw what happened next. Lestat wakes up abruptly out of his dream and awakens to the harsh reality on the bus. Instead of his band, he's greeted by Armand. Now, Lestat is very harsh with Armand here. He says that sure, Armand should be who he is, but be it really far away from him. He also tells him to end himself. Yikes. He says that Armand does more damage than the Queen. Now, this is all foreshadowing. Now, similar to Daniel, Armand wants to read his letter to Lestat. And in it, he describes that he was indeed delusional when they first met. And having known exactly what Magnus was capable of, he should have met Lestat with empathy and kindness. Which suggests to me that Armand knew exactly what Magnus did to Lestat. Armand goes on to say that he walked on a carpet of eggshells for nearly a century, thinking that Lestat would expose his massive lie. Lestat confirms that he did it to torture him, and tangentially make Louis miserable. And side note, I found it really interesting that Armand actually asked if he could read his letter to Lestat, whereas he forced his apology onto Daniel. And that's very telling in my opinion. Very. At the end of their conversation, we see that Armand still must have control. He can't help himself. He still tries to instruct Lestat on his way out. He wants Lestat to stop playing music. He's the cause of major upset. Now and to come. Lestat says he only has 5 shows left and invites Armand to experience the show for himself. We then head back to Louis and Regina, and Louis's been waiting for her to arrive at work. She's missed a couple of shifts and has been worried. And on this night, she arrives late and walks straight past him as he stares at her. Louis uses his mind gift to listen to Regina and her boss's conversation in the back. Now, I did wonder, how often has Louis used his mind gift to listen in on Regina? It's creepy, but Louis has been acting like a creeper this episode. And desperate times will make you do desperate things, which is really sad. I mean, this interaction does not go well. Regina's read the book, she knows what Louis is, and she's scared. But I will say she handled this incredibly well, in my opinion. And at the end of the conversation, it seems that the seeds of their eventual agreement are sown right here. Louis knows that she has an OnlyFans, and that she's been struggling. Regina can see, even if Louis can't just yet, that Louis wants her to play a role for him. Now, I did say this in my reaction video, but my goodness, I have to repeat it here. If the line is right here, right in front of you, then Regina putting on Claudia's actual dress would be way over there, completely over the line. And I have to wonder if Regina does actually do this. I hope she doesn't. But if she does, how would Louis ever recover from that? Now, over to Lestat's gig. He's in his element. He introduces himself as the anxiously attached, toxic bitch with the personality disorder called Lestat. He also brings attention to Armand, who's in the crowd. Now, was the brave thing that Armand did for Lestat to pin Nikki down? Or was it something else entirely, something that we haven't seen yet? Now, what I wanted to point out here is, did you notice Armand's guards or followers right next to him? I saw them immediately. Their faces looked so mean. Now, they stay in the background as Lestat sings the song that is specifically for Armand. It's called Big Boss, and it was wild. Now, I did wonder if the inception of this song came from Salamander's song from the bus. Lestat says that we wrote a song about you, and we know that Salamander's a fan of Armand's. I don't know, that could be silly, but they sounded similar to me. And then we see that Daniel doesn't seem to be taking Lestat's humiliation of Armand particularly well. Which leads us on to Daniel and Armand's showdown. Now, as Daniel's following Armand, Armand does the subtlest of gestures with his hand, which sends his 2 guards away. Now, on my first watch, I didn't catch it, but on my second watch, oh my goodness. Armand. Ooh, Armand. When I saw it, it reminded me so much of Jasper from Talamasca and how he commands his followers or his ghouls with just a flick of a finger. Just something to keep in mind, as I don't think that Armand is as alone or as lonely as he wants people to think. We get onto the vampire bond that seems to really be distressing Daniel. However, it's also driving our mum mad that he can no longer get into Daniel's head. In my reaction video, you can see that initially he got me. I thought he looked so dejected, so sad. However, right now, the Great Conversion seems to be Armand's main focus. He seems to be using his apology tour to further his agenda. And Daniel, after his conversation with Lestat, confronts Armand about Dubai. He wants to know if it was all lies. And was he in fact 2 steps ahead the whole time? Armand says that it was love. Not his love for Louis, but it was love. His love for Daniel, or his love for Lestat? I mean, I'm leaning towards his love for Daniel, and I just can't wait to see how that love developed in the show. And back with Lestat, we see what abandonment really does to him. Now, I couldn't make out exactly what Nikki was writing on the mirror, but what he does say is that when she's not here and when he's not here, I'm third in the queue. And that brings me on to Gabriella's song. Now, in episode 1, Lestat was working on this song as he's waiting for any kind of response from Gabriella. He sings that she used to teach him how to kiss by candlelight. Now, that says to me that seems like it was nightly abuse. Now, my interpretation of the lyrics that we hear in the show is that he wants to bring her flowers. He wants to cheer her up like he used to. Not this new candlelight kissing lessons. He wants to return to the innocence of a child bringing his parent flowers. I mean, I could be completely wrong, but that's what came to me, sadly. On that beach, Lestat wants them to rule as monarchs together, and Gabriella, despite her wish for desolation, still will not commit to him. In the night, we see that Gabriella's cut her hair and she's left him on that shore by himself with not much more than a neck piece. A true abandonment. And back in 2025, Lestat still cannot stand Yada. In fact, as soon as he gets even a glimpse of him, he flicks him out of the way. Now, Gabriella's absence continues to make Lestat revert. He sings a song to the tune of The Wheels on the Bus. And suddenly, the fanatic from episode 1 fires on Lestat, right in front of everyone. Christine is shot, but we don't see them using Lestat's healing blood back on the bus. I wonder why that was. And then, my goodness. Now for the moment that broke my heart and scared me in equal measure. Louis continues to watch Regina, and he's not subtle, even though he could be, being a vampire and all. He tries to keep a distance by sitting in his car, but he's unable to leave her completely alone. She knows he's there, and that's what he wants. She waves him over, and he clumsily makes his way over to the diner. She's thought about their dynamic and seems to be comfortable enough to drive it forward, even if Louis can't himself. She states the amount of money that she would like, and Louis immediately agrees. Now, I have to admit that until she spoke the next lines, I didn't know exactly what was happening on my first watch. But it became all too clear as soon as Regina steadied herself and said, in Claudia's accent, "What now, Daddy Lou?" Oh, my goodness. The look on Louis' face, the implications for the future. How far will they take this? How long can she keep it up? Has Louis bitten off more than he can chew? Has Regina been pulled into a world that she won't escape from with her mortal life? Will she put on that dress? Will Louis be forced to lose this version of Claudia too? It feels like Louis is going to lose himself in this. I mean, he seems to have lost himself already. But I've had a couple of days to think about it, and I have to say that my overwhelming thought at the moment, right now, is I'm just really sad for Louis. He loved Claudia. He's been riddled with guilt ever since her passing. I mean, I cannot imagine seeing the face of somebody that I loved after their past. I mean, what would I do? How close would I want to be to that person? Could I walk away? So many questions, so much pain, but ultimately, Regina isn't Claudia, and I hope Louis wakes up at some point. Will it be Lestat to shake him awake? And finally, what Gabriella wants for the future is dark. It's evil. She said it herself. Now, in episode 1, Lestat mentioned the eradication of the Y chromosome. And that isn't exactly Gabriella's plan right now. But it is someone's plan, and that'll be in the spoiler section too. Now, I do wonder, what were those words that Gabriella used to get Lestat to turn that bus around? I mean, at this point, it seems like Gabriella could have said anything. He just wanted her again. And she's back. He wants to keep her there. But ultimately, he is going to face his muses and make that album. And if you stayed this long, thank you so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. I love all of you guys. So thank you again for watching. And if you don't want to hear about the spoilers, there are only a couple this week. But if you don't want to hear about the spoilers, thank you again. And I will see you in my next one. But if you do, let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to speak about was when Gabriella mentioned Uncle Marius. Now, Marius, as we know, is Armand's maker. In episode 3, Armand says to Gabriella that Marius is dead. Now, as far as Armand knows, he was. Because in the novel and in season 2, we learn that Marius' studio was set on fire, and Armand thinks that Marius was burned in that fire. However, Marius is alive, and Lestat is going to go on a massive journey to find him. It lasts for years. I mean, I don't know how long it will last for in the show, but in the book, it lasts for years. He writes notes all over the place. Wherever he goes, all over the world, he's looking for Marius. And Marius eventually senses that Lestat is looking for him. He also finds these notes that he's left behind. And eventually they meet. Now, Marius, of course, is the keeper of those who must be kept. And that's where I'm going to leave it, I think, for here. Because soon, I think so soon, we're going to get into it. And as soon as we do, we'll discuss everything. But this does lead me on to spoiler section 2. Now, as I mentioned, Lestat said the eradication of the Y chromosome, which of course is the male chromosome. Now, the eradication of all males is something that isn't Gabriella's plan at all. It is actually Akasha's plan in the novel Queen of the Damned. So that was a massive, massive hint. And I'm so sorry I didn't pick up on that in my first watch of episode 1. Okay, so that's all of the spoilers I've got for you this week. Thank you so much again for watching. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. I really would appreciate it. Okay, and with that said, thanks again. Thank you. Bye. Welcome to my channel. My name's Bissy and Akasha's awake. But this week's episode had a very, very clear running theme, in my opinion. I mean, there's so much to get into. But the theme that kept coming back and back to me was predators. From Louis touching Regina like that while she's under his influence, to Daniel using that student aggressively on the 11th of December, 1990. And Armand, absolutely everything he's ever done, and yeah, what he's doing with Larry and Alex. Then of course there's Gabriella, who's preyed on Lestat his entire life. Okay, and with that said, let's get into the breakdown. Okay, so in the opening scenes, we learned that Lestat will stop at absolutely nothing to record this album. An album that he's going to perform just once at a concert that will become infamous. And I'll go into that concert in spoiler section 1. We'll learn that he'll leave the studio just once in 4 months, and that will be to help Louis, but that's much later in the episode. But I will note that later on in this episode, Lestat asks Sophia if the band's performance, make more, satisfied the request. And as we can't forget that he's doing all of this for her. It's her plan for the Great Conversion. He tries, unsuccessfully, to get the sound that he needs from the band. The drums, he's heart. The guitar, he's hunger. The bass, he's night terrors. The lead guitar, he's frailty. And notably, Lestat says, "But I am now digress." Now, this is probably the first time that anybody who's just watched the show has heard the name Amel, and it was repeated quite a few times in this episode, and I'm going to go into a lot of detail about this in spoiler section 2. But for now, we learn that Lestat also faked his death after the shooting. Lestat is still plagued by his muses. I mean, Muse Nikki seems to be tormenting him, whilst he actually welcomes Muse Louis into the booth with him. And I did notice that when Muse Louis walked away, Lestat just couldn't take his eyes off him. And another thing to note is that Muse Louis is dressed from the night of his turning. And another side note, we learned that it was indeed Marius's wrist that we saw in the bunch of clips that we saw from Lestat when he had his breakdown on stage, when Larry wouldn't play the tambourine. We're then introduced to Marius and Akasha. And do you know, it's only just dawned on me that Lestat got himself together very quickly after everything that happens with the Queen. I mean, he meets Louis in 1910, and we know that things hit the fan after 1900. But that's skipping right ahead. Back to now, we're finally introduced to Marius. He revived Lestat on a Spanish shore, I think. And as far as Lestat knew, from Armand, Marius was no longer alive. Marius calls Armand a rotten boy, and my goodness, I don't think he's wrong. But after Armand's description of his time with Marius in season 2, well, I don't have much sympathy for Marius. In fact, I have none. Does a rotten maker make a rotten boy? I guess we'll have to wait to see a little bit more show Marius before we make up our minds. Marius brings Lestat back to his lair, the place where she is kept. He informs Lestat that he saved him at her request, and that Lestat is now the keeper, her keeper. However, in the novel, Lestat's music is the thing that awakens Akasha. But in the show, we see that Lestat learned to play during his time with her. Back in the studio, we learn that Alex is no longer vegan, and in fact, he's off the wagon, and Larry is worried. Lestat thinks that this is distracting him. However, notably, it doesn't distract Lestat. He's so singularly focused on this album that he puts aside all else, even his hatred for Sam Barkley. And when Sam seems complacent, Lestat reminds him that this is the job, Sam. Get on with it. Very much like the way that he had to get on with looking after the Queen after Marius left him. And back with Marius, it seems like he couldn't get out of there quick enough. However, he is providing instruction to Lestat as he packs. How to please her? Bring her presents of the present. How to feed her? With only ash, blood overwhelms her. But these instructions are rushed. We learn that after Gabriella left Lestat in Spain, he spent 80 years underground. Marius tells Lestat that Akasha loves music, but Lestat doesn't know how to play. It's at this point we learn of a new power in the show, mimicry. Marius instructs Lestat to think of his fledgling Nicholas as inspiration. We also learn of Enkil's fate, and that all vampires are linked through Akasha. There was a night, the 19th of December, 1802, when the vampires' bodies burned under the moon, not the sun. Marius had been transporting Akasha and Enkil from one crypt to another when he got drunk and fell asleep. He awoke next to Akasha, his body alight. This was because he hadn't finished the job, and he had left Enkil outside in the sun. And note, the back of Enkil's head is smashed in. His right foot has been broken off. Same with his index finger on his right hand. And of course, he's eternally looking towards Akasha. Now, I don't know for sure, but I think those injuries may be linked to another event, maybe. But ultimately, Lestat learns the essential and awful truth. Akasha is the mother of all vampires. And if she's destroyed, they're all destroyed. We catch up with Daniel, who's been continuing to interview fans of the vampire Lestat post-shooting. We get a glimpse of Armand's ability to possess another. And note, this man, I think, looks like a vampire. I mean, it's the eyes, don't you think? We learn that Armand has indeed been following Daniel for the last 52 years. He'd been sitting on the end of his bed in motel rooms while he was passed out. He's been rescuing Daniel whilst Alice was at home pregnant. And I think that this is confirmation that Armand is not Alice. At least, it confirms it for me. Daniel asks Armand to prove that he loves him. And Armand begins to list very significant moments in Daniel's life where he had input. We learn that Daniel isn't quite as sound as we may have once presumed. On the 11th of February 1990, at a reading, Daniel aggressively uses a student in his rented car. And Armand wiped that terrible memory from the student's mind and made sure that student got home. Now, Armand is using very gentle wording here, but it sounds to me that Daniel did something terrible to the student, who presumably would have been aged somewhere between 18 and very, very early 20s. and Daniel would have been at least 37 in 1990. Daniel then left the boy where? On the street? After he had used him aggressively, with no care of what would happen to him next. Now, I've got to admit that learning this, well, it sickened me. We also hear about one of Daniel's daughter's graduations. She attended Rice University, which initially I thought was a nod to Anne Rice, but actually there is a Rice University in America, I believe. But this still could be a nod to Anne, which I appreciate. Daniel's daughter really didn't want him there. And when Daniel sought solitude in the chapel, which Armand led him to, Armand induced a coughing fit in the priest so that Daniel could have 30 minutes to cry in peace. Now, that sounded to me like he ended the priest. Wild. Armand interrupted Daniel when he was about to say that he would never love him. I mean, this could have been because he couldn't bear to hear it. I don't know. But he entices Daniel by revealing that Sophia is Gabriella, Lestat's mother. Plus, he offers Daniel what he wants: lessons on how to harness his gifts. So, yeah, Louis lost it. I mean, there's not much more I can say about this scene other than, Louis! This was my reaction when an actress was being brought in to play Madeline.
Both of you.
I wish we could stay longer.
No! And note, Regina was wearing another yellow dress. Now, this is reminiscent of the last dress that Claudia wore. The same dress that hangs in Louis' reading room. There's another scene with Louis and Regina by the lake, and Louis takes things way too far. Regina says, "Come on, make me a stone," and Louis does. And just a side note, this is the first we see of Louis exhibiting his powers in front of her. And while she's under his control, Louis reached out and touches her, and I screamed at the television. I mean, honestly, his behaviour seemed to disgust him too. And note, was Regina asking to be made stone foreshadowing? Many of you kindly let me know that Regina's name means queen. I wonder. And then another note, I think Regina was actually writing in one of Claudia's actual diaries, and if she was, that's crazy. We go to Alex and Larry, and Armand likes them vulnerable, doesn't he? And I've been wondering what it was that triggered Alex to start drinking again. Now, I'm really angry about this, as he was doing so well. I mean, he missed the band, and he was missing out on all of their newfound success when he left. But he remained sober, and he was going to meetings. But then, that safe place of encouragement and understanding was infiltrated by Armand. And since then, Alex has fallen off the wagon. I mean, it's just so sad. Alex says to Larry, "You're a shredder with an axe. One take and then rest." And I believe this is Armand speaking through Alex. I think he's been possessed by Armand. Now, if not 100% of the time, definitely very often. And note, we learn that their surname is Slater, and not the Christian Slater who played Daniel in the 1994 movie Interview with the Vampire, I believe. Now, Lestat has been suspended in the air for 3 days. His music and his blood has awakened the Queen. She's confused, she's in pain, and Akasha's performance, wow. There's this vulnerability when she says, "I am the girl," but there's also power when she says, "I am the knight." And she evokes terror and awe throughout the entire monologue. Who is the architect of this suffering? Why must my voice be smooth? Lest I seem aggressive? The "I am the girl" especially? Oof. And if a male won't answer, then the answer to her questions must be I. Me. No one else. Me. I. Just stunning. Now, of course, I even mentioned a male here too. And I'm going to go right into that in spoiler section 2. So look out for it if you do want to know. So it also mentions a tongue being cut out. And that's going to be spoiler section 3. Just before Lestat receives the messages from Louis, we see Lestat being kind to his younger self. He seems to be the only one who ever was. And it was really lovely to see, actually. Not everyone is as kind to their younger selves. And you know, it's a terrible thing when you're simply existing, and in doing so, you attract the attention and obsession of someone else. Their issues, their desire, their needs, their imagined connection with you, their intensity somehow becomes your problem. I try really, really hard not to project my personal experiences onto these characters, but it's so disappointing to me that some people continue to demonize Regina. They act like she sought Louis out. They speak as though she orchestrated this entire situation, as though having issues with money or having an OnlyFans is proof that she's a predator. We learn that, even after they've made their agreement, Louis has been hounding her, constantly bringing her 100 texts a day, showing up at her work, continuously watching her. Now, anyone who's experienced anything like this knows just how overwhelming this type of attention is. So much so that even after $500,000 as compensation, she still needs to walk away sometimes because it gets too much. And note, what do you think the freaky thing that happened was that made Regina take this shift, this time, and made Louis call Lestat? I dread to think. Louis knows that he's fallen off the deep end, and he reaches out to Lestat for help. Despite Lestat being upset that Louis didn't call after he was shot, he still helps, reminding me that Lestat would do anything for Louis. The emotion on Lestat's face as he sits opposite an almost exact replica of his daughter is haunting. Lestat can pick out only two differences between Claudia and Regina, but he seems to be protecting Louis by telling Regina that she's hurting him. And note, I found it very interesting that Regina wasn't scared of Lestat, and although she was offended, she held her own. Lestat and Louis both agree that the spark that was in Claudia's eyes, Regina doesn't have. And this is the inspiration for Lestat writing the most moving song in the entire series, in my opinion. Her stained glass eyes, staring at him until the very end. Her stained glass eyes that are still with him. They continue to stare into his soul. In fact, it's the catalyst for a complete creative change for the album. And note, Sam Barkley produced this song, but he was a major contributor to Claudia's passing. So was Lestat, but I do believe there is more to learn about that. But I just wondered, what did Sam feel whilst he was working on this song in particular? I wish we got a little bit more time on his reaction to see if he felt remorse or indifference. Then we move on to Armand and Larry in the subway. Larry's left the band. The remaining members wish to be turned, with TC reciting, "Make More." Larry's alone on the subway when Armand sneaks beside him. He repeats Alex's words to Larry, "Total shredder with an axe. Diabolical." Armand then gets into Larry's head with the good old rest routine, and sadly force Larry to end right there. Now my question is, why did he do that to Larry? To what end? What plan could possibly benefit from Larry jumping? Lestat said that what Armand did was worse than what the Queen does, and I believe him. Now for those who've been watching my videos for a while, you know that I try to remain balanced, and I do like to see both sides of the events when presented to us. But I've got to tell you, I'm finding it really difficult with this one. But in the spirit of fairness, I will present a possible motive for Armand's actions. And just note, I by no means agree or think that it justifies his actions, but Armand may believe that he's acting for the greater good by removing mortals that are subject to the great law breaks. Again, not an excuse in my opinion, but it could be his reasoning. But the fact remains, we haven't heard his reasoning in the show just yet. So anything said right now is just speculation. And that's about as much energy as I can give him right now, I'm afraid. Okay, thank you so much for watching. That's been my breakdown of episode 5. If you enjoyed this video and you haven't already, please do subscribe. And if you'd like to stay spoiler free, then I will say goodnight for now, and I will see you in my next one. But for those of you who are going to stick around, let's get into the spoilers. Okay, so spoiler section 1 is the infamous concert. Now, I mentioned this earlier in the video, and we know that in this season, Lestat has been on tour. However, in the book The Vampire Lestat didn't actually go on tour. He did one concert only, and I think this season is going to culminate in this one big show. Now, at the concert, there were lots of other vamps who were very, very angry at Lestat for exposing the truth. Now, this is a very big spoiler, but at the concert, Akasha then takes out all of Lestat's opponents, let's call them. And at the very end, after he leaves, she abducts him. And that is how The Vampire Lestat ends. Now, on to spoiler point 2. The name Emil is said many times in this episode. Now, if you haven't heard of Emil, this is going to be pretty interesting. Now, in the book and in the show, Lestat has Akasha's blood within him, and we see it in this episode how he gets that blood. But he also has the blood of Emil in him. Now, the story I'm about to tell you is from The Vampire Lestat, but there is a different story of how this unfolded in the novel Queen of the Damned. But Marius doesn't learn that truth for thousands of years, so I'm going to focus in this section on what Marius learns and therefore tells Lestat in The Vampire Lestat. And for context, Marius is being told this story by the previous keeper. Okay, so in Old Egypt, there's stories of spirits, the type that hurl furniture around, that make women scream obscenities. And King Enkill said that he will speak to this spirit, and if it doesn't work, he would agree for it to be cast out. Enkill says that he understands why the spirits rage. It's because they don't have bodies. They can work the body, but they can't inhabit them. He was about to lock himself in the haunted house when Akasha tried to stop him. She eventually locked herself in there with him. The noises from inside the house were frightening, and cracks began to appear on the walls. And the only ones who remained outside were the few men who actually hated Enkill and Queen Akasha. They always had. When night fell, they crept into the haunted house, and when they saw Akasha and Enkill sat in the middle of the floor with objects flying around them, the men set upon them and stabbed them over and over. Enkill shouted, "No, you don't see what you've done. You've given the spirits a way in. You've opened my body to them." The men ran, believing that they had successfully taken the king and queen out. And upon returning to the haunted house, the king and queen stood there. All their wounds healed. Their eyes had taken on an eerie light, their skin pale. They had been entered by the spirit, at the point where mortal life would have ended. But it was the blood that it wanted, a combination of human and spirit. All that was left of the king and queen was what the blood could animate. The spirit itself had no character, but it enhanced theirs. They were new things. They could no longer eat food or age or have children. Then the terrible discovery that the only thing that could keep their corpses animate was blood. It couldn't get enough. They were drinkers of the blood. They could not get rid of it. And of course, that spirit's name was Amil. Now, for spoiler section 3, I've been really struggling with how much to share. Now, Akasha mentioned about a tongue being cut out, and I think she's referring to the twins, the red-haired twins. Now, we found out all about them in The Queen of the Damned, but I don't want to give everything away right away because we've just had the slightest mention. But what I will say is that they are over 6,000 years old. They are witches, but in that they can communicate with spirits. They always have been. And remember, Amel was a spirit. I will also say that I think that they are playing a part in what's happening right now in current events, if they're going to remain true to the book. And finally, I will say that the atrocities that happen to these twins. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it for now anyway. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. And I will see you next week for the penultimate episode. Okay. Thank you again. Thanks. Bye. Welcome to my channel. My name's Missy and Lestat, I've missed you. What an episode. Okay, so this week I don't have a spoiler section, but we're going to go into a lot of detail during the breakdown. Okay, and with that said, let's get into the episode. So we meet Lestat in a period of hibernation, back at home. Well, a halfway home in Montreal, at the start of what is going to be a very, very long night. Lestat, as we know, is an early riser, and it seems that the vampire Alex is too. The band have moved back into their place across the street from Lestat, and we learn that Lestat is not Alex's maker. Lestat speaks to him telepathically, and Alex pointedly ignores him. Now, initially, I wondered why, but Lestat mentioned that they had no knowledge of what really happened to Larry. So Alex's head could literally be spinning with all sorts of theories. And specifically, I'm thinking back to that very last conversation that Alex and Larry had last week. And just as a side note, I did like the way that Lestat spelled Louis' name in his phone. So cute. We'll also see that Lestat is trying on his new identity and trying to decide what's next, after his obligations have been met, of course, and, I think, without Gabriella. Louis' been living with him for the past 6 weeks or so, and they're preparing to meet Merrick Mayfair. Merrick being a witch from New Orleans, who Lestat has a connection to. Now, if you did listen to my spoiler section from last week, and you don't know already, then you would know that a witch, I think, is someone who I would say can communicate with spirits. Neither Louis or Lestat think that this is a good idea, and Louis really doesn't think that a concert is a good idea. It's Halloween, 2 years to the day that Lestat met the band, and the band has been turned. Alex by Gabriella. And later in this episode, we'll see that Lestat asks her to go and be a mother to him. He needs her. Now, I don't know about you, but it almost feels like it's a bit brotherly, the way he's looking out for Alex here to Gabriella. We saw last week that Lestat was very, very kind to his younger self. And maybe he's seen Alex now as a little bit of a younger brother in some way, some sense, somehow. I don't know. I mean, he's always been fond of the entire band, so it could just be that. And also, I just keep thinking that Alex has had such a raw deal. I mean, his sobriety has been destroyed by Armand. His brother has been taken out by Armand. For what reason? We haven't had confirmation yet. He was turned by the most unfit maker that we know of. And on a side note, I wonder if Sam was the one who turned Salamander. And did Lestat turn TC? And is this how she earns her spot at the long table? Louis and Lestat walk over to Louis' restaurant. On the walk, Louis ends a call with Lem, with Me Too, right in front of Lestat. And of course, Lestat doesn't miss it. Side note, it was at this point that I wondered, would Lestat ever have a moment where someone he loved isn't actually hurting him? Even if it's unintentionally. I mean, oh my goodness. The one thing he wanted from Louis, the thing he waited patiently for, even if it was in vain, the thing that Louis kept and continues to keep from him, Louis seems to infer to Lemmy, in front of Lestat. Ugh, these two. We learn that after the intense stalking of Regina, Louis ghosted her, which for him is probably a needed move. But in my opinion, ultimately, it's selfish. There are much healthier and more mature ways to end situations like that. The situation that he pulled her into. I just hope that after all of this, she gets away with her life and all that Louis said he would pay her. I hope. They enter Louis' restaurant a stone's throw away from Lestat's home, and Louis later admits that its location is not an accident. They sit down with Daniel together for one final session. But in this session, Daniel knows about Gabriella. He's been training with Armand. I mean, Daniel literally has a tan. And note, Lestat says, "Did you overshoot your coffin again?" And this made me think, did Daniel perhaps tease the son as a result of his transformational trauma? Lestat also says the tan of whatever you want, sweetheart. As in, he knows what it's like to have Armand on his neck. And I mean that literally and figuratively. Is Lestat aware, maybe on some subconscious level, that Armand is teaching Daniel? And Daniel has finally become his true fledgling? I don't know. But Daniel presumably is in on more of Armand's plan now. And that's a whole lot more than Louis and Lestat know. I mean, we later learn that Daniel was actually trying to read their thoughts. And I think it just goes to show how powerful Daniel was set to become if he survives. As usually, it takes centuries for someone to become a daywalker. I mean, he's doing it within months of Armand beginning to train him. And also, just how are Lestat and Louis both unable to sense Daniel's duplicity? I mean, is it really because of that fog of love? It has to be, right? Or is it complacency? Lestat says to Louis later on in the car, that they are better than him. Lestat foreshadows his time in the forest, transcribing birdsong. Well, I don't know if it's foreshadowing, but it is interesting. Louis says that he tried to respect Daniel's privacy during their 2022 sessions, which of course is a massive slap in the face to Daniel. Now that Daniel knows that Louis knew about the 52 years. Or did Louis know? And if Armand did report back to Louis, did he then remove the information from Louis's mind? Who knows? We literally do not know. And with anybody else, I don't think even the question would be there whether that information remains within Louis. But we're dealing with Armand here, and the behaviour has been proven. And then when it comes to the interview, that's the end of it. There's nothing else. Except we meet a distant de Liancourt descendant, and the three of them feed. Lestat and Louis are on their way to meet Sophia, and Lestat opens a line of communication about their relationship. The fact that Lestat kept so much from Louis is brought up. So is Louis's guilt. And also, yes, justice for Antoinette. We know that having the blood of Akasha in him changed Lestat. We know that it's a struggle to resist the urges that it encourages. But we also know that it provides a certain amount of protection to him. And the phrase, "I have the blood of Akasha in me," has become something of a comfort blanket for Lestat. Lestat admits to Louis that he's a monster. It's not said with pride, and to me, he says it with sadness, regret, resignation. But that's just my read. And finally, Louis meets Sophia. And note, later in the episode we learn that there was a portrait of Lestat's mother over their coffins in New Orleans for 30 years in that coffin room. So my question is, how did Louis not recognize Gabriella? And that also leads to the question, if it wasn't Gabriella in that painting, who was it? But that's skipping right ahead. Back to the meeting, Louis and Gabriella sit to watch Lestat and the band rehearse. And I'd just like to note that Alex looks just about as melancholy as you would imagine after mysteriously losing his brother. Salamander's as chill as he's ever been. Love that for him. And TC seems pumped. As the band warms up, Louis and Gabriella discuss tomorrow's show. Gabriella warns that Louis might be better off not coming. But Louis knows that it will hurt Lestat too much if he didn't show. Then, Lestat performs Brutal Love, as both Gabriella and Louis sit right next to each other. But there's no doubt who this song is for and who he's singing it to, and Gabriella knows it. Lestat and Louis are locked in a way that she and he never have been. As Lestat sings, "Show me that bitter star, I want it. Give me that brutal love, I want it all. Writing your name in dust as I fall." And it is absolutely peak Lestat, i.e. Louis and Lestat. And for me, it's the reason I love this show. It's the reason I settled in for episode 2 and every episode thereafter. This moment was stunning, and I'm so glad they didn't rush it. As Louis gets a link sent to him from Lem, Lestat sings some lines from his song to Louis, "Come to Me," which again was stunning. But Gabriella cannot let Lestat leave without toying with him one more time. She wants to send Lestat off to Spain when it's all done. Spain, Gabriella, the shores of which you left him all those years ago. She too is diabolical, seriously. But I did want to note here, will we ever meet Arturo? In the car, Louis opens his message from Lemmy and sees a clip from Daniel's documentary, Interview with the Vampire Lestat. We learn a couple of things from this clip. Firstly, Daniel's been creepily filming Lestat and Gabriella after the shooting. And Armand wasted no time in teaching Daniel how to walk in the sun. I don't really think that Daniel would have let him take his time, but that's a separate conversation. I do wonder, however, how long this one will hold, Daniel and Armand, when this between them is their basis. This is their foundation. And it's not just for Armand at the moment. It's the foundation that both of them stand on. But, of course, for now, Daniel is very, very much with Armand. And Lestat's secret is out. Louis had an understandable initial response to finding out that Lestat is currently sleeping with his mother. But as soon as Louis starts to reject Lestat, Lestat throws up. Panic sweeps over him as Louis exits the car. Now, like many of us, I found this scene in the trailers humorous and justifiable. But this is exactly why I love context so much. Throughout this season, we've seen what happened with Lestat and his mother as humans, which leads to Lestat's current situation with his mother. We've seen that after they were changed, Lestat tried to confront her about what she did to him. But he was manipulated by the one thing he always needed. The I love you from his mother completely disarms him. And he's hers, to do with as she pleases, whilst she wants, and hers to discard whenever she's done with him. He's currently in the middle of this cycle that they've been in and out of for centuries. And now, not only the world knows about it, but Louis does too. And he's running away from him. Panic! And on top of it all, Louis compares Lestat's lie of omission about his mother to Armand's deceit. And this sends Lestat over the edge. Now, I just wanted to note that Louis does this in almost the exact same way that he accused Armand in Season 2, Episode 4. You remember, just as they're entering the Louvre, Louis accuses Armand of hiding his strength after the restaurant scene. He calls it vintage Lyoncourt. Now, I can see where Louis, in the moment, was coming from with his comparison. It's the very same night as their last session with Daniel. And the last time he did this, a huge revelation shook his entire life. So I understand. It's not fair, but I do understand. But judgment from Louis in this moment isn't what was called for, perhaps. Lestat communicates that he had just spent the last month and a half working with Louis to pull him off the ledge of the situation he had gotten himself into with Regina, all whilst going through his own incredibly present fracturing. He tries to explain the complexities of his relationship with Gabriella, whilst trying to understand it himself. He says all of this as he's throwing up. Now, I don't know if anyone has ever experienced this, but it's happened to me just once. Absolute shock leading to sickness immediately. He's having a panic attack, and thankfully, Louis snaps back and comforts him. He also apologizes in the moment, which I think is key. He holds him and waits with him until he calms a little. Oh, what a scene! Then, surprisingly, they go to a bar, just like a pair of mortals might. They suffer through a couple of pints, topped up with blood, and they talk. Lestat conducts his own chaos, and I think that line, more than any other line in the show so far, is a window into Lestat, and what it might take to understand him. We then meet Merrick Mayfair, who's set up in Lestat's townhouse. Using Claudia's diary and dress, she calls upon Spirit Claudia. Now, this scene was so incredibly moving, and I really, really hope that this was Spirit Claudia. I hope it wasn't a trick. Now, as you may have heard before in my previous videos, I haven't read Merrick yet. I'm close, but I haven't read it. So this is why I don't have a spoiler section at the end of this video, because it would be secondhand information that I'm giving you. I mean, I haven't read it myself, so I haven't formed my own opinions. But what I will say is that there's a different storyline that happens with Merrick and Louis throughout that book, but I don't think that they're going to include it in the show. So I don't think that that would be a beneficial spoiler anyway, I think. But again, I haven't read it, so I don't know. Okay, back to the scene. I mean, I'm still struggling to find words to describe it. I mean, this performance, the set, it's just everything, absolutely everything was almost a little bit too real. But I'm going to do my best and I'm going to break it down as much as I can. So very simply put, Lestat was Claudia's favourite. And honestly, I often think about if Lestat had been honest with them, this story could have been very, very different. I mean, he and Claudia had so much in common. And I still wonder if Lestat is still protecting Louis's feelings in this very moment, in the recording for the auction winner. Maybe Claudia said even more. I constantly have to remind myself that we're not seeing these events like we did the events unfold in Dubai. This is Lestat's story. But we see that Spirit Claudia says that she hates Louis. She hates him more than Bruce. She hates him more than the Parisian Coven. She hates him more than anything she's ever known. She calls him a slave. And she said that that's why she ultimately chose him, as she thought of removing him instead of Lestat. She tells him to burn her dress. She tells him to burn her diaries and to stop saying her name. Oh my gosh. She's raging. She's been raging. And she's been searching. She's been all alone, just like she was throughout her time with Louis. Remember, Louis didn't choose her. She wasn't put first very often. Even when he said, it's me and you and me. It's me and you. Oh, I forgot you can't see me. I'm just shaking my head. It's so, oh gosh, this is the rage that we feel from Spirit Claudia in this moment. And the fact that it's directed at Louis mostly is, my goodness, it is not what I expected, but I very, very much understand it. But when she turns her rage to Lestat, she seems to be a little bit confused as she mixes up some names. I mean, I could be completely wrong, but it seems that in the second part, she mixes up Tom Anderson and Antoinette, but I don't know. And of course, Madeline, the heartbreak that was Madeline. Claudia's been searching for her this entire time, and she hasn't been able to find her. She's been in the darkness. She's been nowhere. She's been without the one person who ever brought her any joy. She's been lost for over 70 years. Where is she? Oh, Claudia. I literally am like the streaming, crying emoji at the moment. Claudia! And the final thing on this scene is we saw that the circle was broken. So, was Merrick successful in bringing Claudia back, in reining her in? I wonder. I really, really wonder. And then we sit on another bench in another park, and we learn that the songs are mostly about Louis. I mean, anyone could have told Lestat that, but he had to admit it. After that otherworldly experience, Louis and Lestat walk. Neither of them have sufficient words for what they've just experienced. But they sit and they talk, and they keep talking, which is going to be key for them. They keep talking. Louis notices that Alex is watching them, a distraction. And as they both look at him, Armand and Daniel creep up beside them and they slice. Now, on a side note, Lestat was aware of Armand being in town. So why couldn't he sense Alex watching them? And this has got me really, really thinking. I mean, a couple of things this episode have. But is the fog of love really, really that blinding? I mean, it must be for vampires, right? So when it happened, when Armand and Daniel did what they did, my very first thought was Dr. Farid. Did Armand get to him too? Or will someone else pick them up and put them back together? I mean, it seemed like Daniel and Armand walked off after they did what they did. I'm not sure though. It was very quick. I do worry though, because Dr. Farid didn't seem 100% happy with his circumstances this season. Maybe he didn't like being on tour, but at the same time, he did open up to Lestat about his mother. So yeah, I don't know. But Dr. Farid did mention to Daniel that someone of Lestat's breeding could last hours without a head. So is this where the idea came from? But the lingering question that I have over Armand and his plans remain: why? To what end? Although it was shocking to see, on my second watch I did catch that Lestat was trying to comfort us in the beginning of this episode. I mean, we started right in the middle in episode 1. So we're out of sequence here. And of course we see real Louis at the auction. And I can only presume that the forest next week is going to run red with blood. So with next week being the finale, how much of Daniel, Alex and Armand's actions will be exposed? I mean, we're only on album 55. And what are there, 110 altogether? So there's so much of this story to go. And I really, really hope we get a season 4. Okay, thank you so much for watching. That's been my breakdown of episode 6. If you haven't already, please subscribe and I will see you next week, hopefully. Okay, thank you. Bye. Welcome to my channel. My name's Bissy and season 3 is done. And I just wanted to say a massive thank you to absolutely every single one of you who have watched along with me this entire time. This has been so much fun watching it with you all. So thank you to every single one of you who have liked, shared, commented and hyped my videos. You all are amazing. We've also gone from 11% to 15% of you who are subscribed, but I'd love to get that number up to 50%. So if you're enjoying my videos but you haven't already, please do subscribe. And without further ado, let's get into the breakdown of the Vampire Lestat finale. So for this breakdown, I'm going to focus on each section rather than every scene because we did jump around quite a bit. So first off, let's focus on the long table. Now, Lestat's hunger and the theme of consumption has been a massive thing throughout this entire season, actually throughout the entire series. Most of the scenes in Dubai were around either dining or speaking about dining or consuming of some sort. And it's the same here. So I thought I would note that because it is such a prevalent theme. We find Lestat seated at one of the heads of the long table, and Lestat seems excited at the prospect of seeing Claudia. He even bounces with excitement when he notices Antoinette. And speaking of Antoinette, Gabriella says that Miss Brown would get her turn. But I don't think we saw that. And side note, Antoinette goes from typing on a typewriter to typing on a laptop, which I think symbolises the progression of Lestat in his own psyche. Now in episode 3, Magnus mentioned to Lestat in the car that they were on course 68, and I did wonder of what, but it seems they've been feasting on his soul. But physically, the people at the long table, Gabriella, Louis, Nikki, TC, Antoinette, Magnus, and later on, Marius, the people are eating sheep's head, eyes, and sausages. But there is also blood, so again, consumption. I mean, everybody at this table is a vampire now, so they don't need to consume food. I mean, they wouldn't enjoy consuming food in real life. So I think it's very significant that they are consuming, especially a sheep's head at this time. The long table moves from the forest, the scene of the burning, but also where Lestat finds peace with birdsong, to Magnus's tower, the scene of the horrors that Magnus subjected him to, and also where he was turned. And finally, to the studio, where he spent 4 months making this album to please Gabriella, but where he also spent time immersed completely in music, one of his few great joys. In the forest, he confronts his younger selves. In the tower, he's berated, criticised, mocked and antagonised by his maker and most of his fledglings. In the studio, he's confronted about the performance where his muses were not in attendance. The errors were pointed out by the tenor, in the same way that Lestat did to him. And on the word child, glimpses of what Gabriella has done to him over the centuries flash in Lestat's mind, and he sings her name over and over and over. Scenes from his childhood as she made him watch the women burn. Scenes at their dining table, Gabriella's turning, scenes of Gabriella with the Italian man, Gabriella touching him after he killed the wolves, and the look on his face as she does so. Scenes from her return to him this time, and the sound of Lestat screaming for his mother. But he also confronts Gabriella about taking him to watch his friends burn at the age of 9. Gabriella says that she took him to see these women and children burn to show him who these people are. They are not her people. This is not her home. She could not leave, but she wanted one of her sons to make it out of there. This right here is who these people are. But Lestat stayed home until he was 29. Now I say 29 because Lestat mentioned to Daniel in episode 3 that he moved to Paris and met Nikki in Paris when he was 29. But in this scene, Gabriella says 30. So, 29 to 30, there's not much difference, but both ages have been mentioned in the show. And Gabriella calls him a cabbage. But then we get a glimpse of Gabriella telling Lestat that she loves him right after she's finished using the Italian man. And Lestat calls to his mother. We see flames appear as the scene of Lestat holding Claudia and forcing her to watch Charlie's body burns appears, repeating what he learnt from his mother. And sat at the table, all Lestat can do is make the noise that he said that Nicky made as he burned, as though Lestat himself was burning, right behind those flames. Magnus then dares to chastise Gabriella for touching Lestat. They're both monsters. How dare he? Now, for just a moment, I want to speak about the word failure. Now, to me, this is just a personal thing, but I only feel like I've failed if I haven't given 100%. I think there is a difference between failing and not succeeding, because you can try 100% and not succeed, but I don't class that as a failure, in my opinion. For me personally. So it is difficult for me to watch Lestat be called and call himself a failure constantly. But what do you think of the word failure and the fact that the entire album is titled The Failures? So back to Magnus, we see that the final seat is taken up by him, another critical voice in Lestat's head. But Lestat is the only one who can control the volume, Gabriella said. Plus, as a side note, if Nicky knows their exact location as Daniel walks Lestat down the street, he also knows where his body is. And given the fact that he's zipped up in a bowling ball bag, I wonder how that works. And as the snooze on the alarm of his self-loathing rings, Lestat stands up and really takes the reins. But before he does, Daniel says, as he peers his head into the bag, that he's over his transformational trauma. He also says, I only give a shit about Dan. And I found that very, very interesting. Now, onto the butcher shop. We see that this is how Armand fights. He doesn't fight with his fists, but this is how he fights back. The planning, the scheming, the waiting, and then the striking. Armand has 3 things he'd like to highlight to confess to Louis. 3. And note, I really, really do not like the way that he's perverted the steps of recovery. He's done it throughout this process, starting by infiltrating the meeting with Alex. In fact, I hate it. Ugh. Armand backdoored his way into Lestat's band and ruined it for ruining's sake. He found it fun. And Armand still has his backdoor into Lestat's band through Alex. It was shocking for me to see Armand acting like this. The set, the butcher shop, right after he had just removed Louis' head, and his demeanour. And with the caveat that this is Lestat telling Louis' story, I believe that Armand is saying all of this and being so openly maniacal because he believes that Louis will forget all of this. That's if they're successful at reattaching his head to his body. And just a side note, once Armand has what he wanted, he simply walked away and didn't seem to care too much if Farid could or indeed would reattach Louis' head. We learn about Armand's plan to hurt Louis after Dubai. Armand said that Louis was his Claudia. In the same way Louis had an obsession for forgiveness regarding Claudia, Louis was that for Armand. So the search for the one thing that would destroy Louis started that night in Dubai. He said that the idea of her was conceived the moment Louis slammed him against that wall. But my question is, was the madness that followed in Louis part of the plan, or just a happy coincidence? And was the fact that this ultimately brought Louis and Lestat closer together part of the plan, or an unforeseen accident? So Regina was mind-effed into a situation that she really, really couldn't get herself out of. She tried in the best way that she knew how. She walked into a police precinct and said, I'm in some trouble. It's weird, he's a vampire. And even as Armand tries to get her to rest, she lets her true feelings for Louis out. She says she likes him. She felt for him. She says, they're going to sell a snuff tape, Louis. Don't give it to them. Now, one thing I did want to know is that I found it interesting. Again, this is Lestat telling the auction winner what Louis told him about the scene where his head was removed from his body. Okay, so again, that is the caveat. But I did find it interesting that Regina's speech pattern seems to be almost Dickensian. I mean, nobody speaks like this, like calling him a fiend, like, I mean, I know East London, and yeah, nobody speaks like this. So I did find it very, very interesting that that was the speech pattern that she had adopted in that moment. Again, it is a telling of a telling. And back to Armand, he says to Louis that you're going to make amends so we can both move on. And to me, this was when the light bulb came on my second watch. This entire exercise isn't only to get an apology out of Louis. It's not just for amends. In my opinion, it's so that he can move on completely and begin his relationship with Daniel, with none of the ex-drama that he and Louis had with Lestat. A clean slate. Maybe Daniel seeded the idea after his conversation with Farid in episode 4. And it felt like Armand was killing two birds with one stone, making Daniel happy with this huge gesture. I mean, this is similar to offering Daniel the sun, if you let him be his maker, and putting a full stop at the end of his and Louis' relationship. Let's not forget that the revenge plan was put into place 3 years ago, and I think that this was a way to have a definitive end. Armand slams his hand on the table as Louis declines, like a child. His plan isn't going the way he wanted it to in the moment. It's a tiny detail, but to me, it's showing that Armand is still back there in Italy. It's that pain that's driving him in this particular moment. Not the patient aggressor, not the cult leader, but the child. It seemed that Armand just wanted to know that Louis understood him. And I think back to their walk in the Louvre. And I really do believe that that was a genuine attempt to allow Louis in by telling him the worst things that happened to him. Louis acknowledges what Armand went through at 12 years old, and the fact that they didn't speak about the fact that Louis was indeed a pimp only decades before they met. Louis, in spite of the fact that his head had literally been removed from his body by Armand, and the fact that this whole thing was being live streamed to a room full of people in another country, Louis finds compassion for that child, and he apologizes. And that sigh from Armand when Louis is done, I mean, yeah, I'm lost for words. Now, just a couple of things that I wanted to note. Louis says, the love of my life was him. Now, Louis uses the past tense here, and I don't know, I don't want to look too deeply into that, but I found it interesting. And another note, that Louis' neck scar is gone by the auction. So it makes me wonder whatever happened to Armand's eye must have been fairly recent to the auction. Okay, and on to Daniel's section. So we transition from Armand to Daniel on the word companion. And I absolutely love that the bowling alley employee calls Daniel's wife the boss. Literally, big boss. Daniel says later to Ragland, rescue the head, save the world. And that really reminded me of Heroes. Do you remember that show, Heroes? Where the mantra was almost, save the cheerleader, save the world. Ragland says, make more. We came up with that. And on Ragland, I've got a really big question. I mean, is he using the royal we here? Or is this a rogue plan of his? The most we're seen of Ragland's character is in the show Telemasca. And very briefly, without spoilers, Ragland plays the long con with Guy, and that's Guy Anatole. He's the main character in Telemasca. He knows that Guy's lying, and he plays along, right until the opportunity arises for him to further his own agenda, and he throws Guy right under the bus to the London Coven. The events of the scene wind up favouring Ragland, and he walks away on top, with exactly what he came for. So why would Ragland want the Great Conversion to take place? Well, from Telemasca, we know that he wants every move he makes to benefit him in some way. So how might he benefit from the Great Conversion? The only answer that I'm able to land on right now is, where there's chaos, there's opportunity. And Ragland is nothing if not an opportunist. And to speculate any further about his motives in the show would be tricky for me, as we just haven't been given much more detail in the show. But back to Daniel, he seems lost in that bowling alley to me. He's angry with Lestat, he's confused by Alex, I think he's still unsure of Armand and his motives. I mean, he isn't sure if Armand sent Alex there to watch him. And as I mentioned in the long table section, Lestat says that Daniel says to his head in the bowling bag that Dan only cares about Dan. But faced with Ragland and his backup, Daniel gives in and allows Ragland to take Lestat's head back. And this section I'm calling pretty effing great. So at the show that never started, we meet those who Lestat has murdered, made, or memorably traumatized. And note, Lestat says, I was supposed to stage dive at a certain point, but he doesn't. Now, is he recreating a show or a dream? I mean, that's what it felt like to me. We meet Enzo, a man that Lestat drained at a Christmas market in 1953 in Vienna. Now, a lot of time was given to Enzo, and I don't know why exactly. I mean, I don't think it was Enzo Ferrari, but Lestat is sorry. He seems to have a lot of regret around Enzo. We also meet the inspiration for the song Black Licorice. In episode 2, Lestat corrected TC and said that that song was about the first kill after he and Louis reconciled. And if you remember, when Louis meets up with him in 2022, he'd been feeding on rats for a very long time. Lestat said he killed him in the lower ninth, but I'm really intrigued by the red truck that Black Licorice is leaning on. But ultimately, Black Licorice acts as another snooze reminder. And as Lestat declines, Paul appears. At the beginning of this scene, Lestat says that the people here were people he had murdered, made, or memorably traumatized. And on my first watch, I was so sad at the thought that maybe Lestat actually lied, and Paul might have been there because Lestat was actually the reason that he jumped. But after rewatching and sitting with it for a little while, it doesn't seem to me that Paul falls into any of those three options. He wasn't there all along. I mean, he wasn't there from the beginning. He appeared at Lestat's lowest moment. And this suggests to me that his appearance was something else. Something outside of Lestat's victims as he described. But I mean, of course, I could be wrong. That's just my interpretation. Paul comforts Lestat by telling him that Louis does indeed love him, and thanks Lestat for loving Louis the way that he needed to be loved. Then Paul hears the birds again and presses stop on the snooze button. Then Lestat wakes up in his coffin on the tour bus. Gabriella and the Telemasca have managed to reattach Lestat's head to his body, and, notably, given him a fresh blow-dry. Plus, they've dressed him, ready for his awaited audience. And after Lestat finds and reconnects with Louis, he gives it to Gabriella. It's been 7 episodes coming, but he finally gives it to her, and it was amazing. But we know that he does eventually, despite everything, despite screaming at her that he wouldn't, he does indeed perform. And the consequences are dire. We catch up with Lestat just over halfway through his recordings, number 58, side A, of 111 albums. And we see the destruction that happened after the show. The destruction that followed after the Queen awakens. The city has been flattened, but not Lestat's home. I mean, the band's home is gone. But interestingly, Lestat's home still has power. And as Lestat surveys the damage in the twilight, or is that the sun rising? I think it's twilight. He retracts what he says in episode 1. He admits that the fault was indeed his. And that is the end of season 3. Now, I just have a few final thoughts that I would love to share with you, and hopefully we can discuss them in the comments. But I did love this season. I really did. I mean, Lestat, the story of them rebuilding, the fact that it wasn't like a sexual relationship, it was much more based on communication. I loved it. I loved the storylines that went from the book. I mean, Regina, that was a stroke of genius, in my opinion. Akasha, wow. But I do have to say that I personally missed the pacing from seasons 1 and 2. And I think that's why I keep going back to episode 3. Episode 3, as difficult as it was to watch, felt the most like interview to me. But on the other hand, I understand that the pace had to change for the story. I do wish we had more episodes. I mean, I wouldn't even want to be greedy, but 10 seems fair. I wonder what the reason for 7 is. I mean, is it the viewership? Is it just not high enough? Is it the cost? Is there a budgeting issue? I mean, it can't be the lack of content to draw from. I mean, I don't know. But ultimately, in my opinion, it was a great season of television, and I cannot wait for season 4. Okay, thank you so much again for watching, and I will be with you all the way through this wait until season 4. Thank you again, and I hope to see you in my next one. Okay, thank you. Bye.